The doorbell rings. Barbara Gordon sets down her coffee cup, the ceramic clicking softly against the kitchen table. She's not expecting anyone. Her father, Commissioner James Gordon, sits across from her, his glasses perched on his nose as he studies case files spread before him like a map of Gotham's endless misery. It is a quiet evening, one of those rare moments when the city seems to exhale, when the sirens grow distant and the shadows outside the window feel almost peaceful. Barbara rises from her chair. The floor creaks beneath her feet. She crosses the living room of her modest apartment, her hand reaching for the door handle, her mind wandering to mundane possibilities. A neighbour borrowing sugar, a delivery she had forgotten, perhaps one of her father's colleagues stopping by unannounced. She opens the door. The man standing on the threshold wears a Hawaiian shirt. Garish orange and yellow flowers splashed across the fabric like a fever dream. His skin is the colour of bleached bone. His hair, a shock of green that seems to glow under the hallway's flickering light. And his smile. That smile. It stretches too wide, carved into his face like a wound that never healed, and in that frozen fraction of a second, Barbara Gordon recognizes him. Everyone in Gotham knows that face. Everyone in Gotham has seen it in their nightmares. The Joker raises the camera. No, not a camera. Her eyes track downward. The gun. The barrel aimed at her midsection, cold steel catching the light. He pulls the trigger. The shot tears through her. The bullet rips through her spine, and Barbara Gordon's legs cease to exist. Not gone. Worse. Present but useless, betraying her in the moment she needs them most. She falls backward, crashing through the coffee table, glass shattering around her like frozen rain, and the world becomes a kaleidoscope of agony and confusion. She cannot feel her legs. She cannot move her legs. She tries to scream, but the sound that escapes her throat is something primal, something that does not belong to the composed young woman who had been sipping coffee moments before. The Joker steps inside. His shoes crunch on the broken glass. He's humming something, a tune that sounds almost cheerful, a melody that belongs at a carnival, not at the scene of a shooting. Behind him, his men pour into the apartment, thugs in clown masks, their laughter muffled and mechanical. Commissioner Gordon rises from his chair, reaching for his sidearm, but they are upon him before his fingers touch the holster. They beat him. They beat him with practiced efficiency, fists and clubs raining down until the old man crumples to the floor beside his daughter. Barbara lies in a spreading pool of her own blood. The ceiling above her has cracks she never noticed before, hairline fractures running through the plaster like the streets of Gotham seen from above. Strange, the things you notice when your body's in shock. Strange, the clarity that comes when everything else is falling apart. The Joker crouches beside her. His face fills her vision. That impossible smile. Those eyes, green or grey or something in between, and utterly terrifyingly empty of anything she might call humanity. He tilts his head like a curious dog examining roadkill. "Well," he says, his voice a rasp wrapped in velvet, "I have to say the Commissioner's daughter cleans up nice. Or should I say, cleaned up?" He giggles at his own joke. The sound is high-pitched, almost childlike, and it turns Barbara's blood to ice. "Oh, don't look at me like that. You're going to be part of something beautiful tonight, something meaningful. Your daddy and I are going to have a little conversation about the nature of sanity." He raises his camera, an actual camera this time, a Polaroid that whirs and clicks. The flash blinds her. Again and again. He takes photograph after photograph, circling her broken body like a vulture, capturing her agony from every angle. She tries to cover herself. She tries to crawl away, but her legs are dead weight, dragging behind her, and all she can do is leave bloody handprints on the floor as she claws uselessly toward nowhere. The Joker's men strip her father. They strip him of his clothes, his dignity, his authority. Commissioner James Gordon, the most incorruptible man in Gotham, the last honest cop in a city of crooked badges, is reduced to a naked, beaten figure dragged toward the door like a sack of meat. "Don't worry, Babs," the Joker calls over his shoulder, using the nickname like they are old friends, like he has not just destroyed everything she is and everything she will ever be. "I'll take good care of Daddy. We're going to have so much fun together." The door closes behind them. Barbara Gordon lies alone in the wreckage of her life. The blood is warm at first, then cooling, then cold. She does not know how long she stays there, minutes or hours, time losing all meaning in the haze of shock and pain. Eventually she hears sirens. Eventually she hears voices. Eventually strong hands lift her onto a stretcher, and fluorescent lights blur past overhead, and someone is saying words that do not connect into sentences. Spinal cord damage. Permanent paralysis. She will never walk again. In the ambulance, staring up at the metal ceiling, Barbara Gordon allows herself one thought before the sedatives drag her under. One question that will haunt her for years, that will fuel her transformation into something new, something powerful, something the Joker never anticipated. Why? Not why her, not why tonight. But a deeper why, the kind of question that gnaws at the foundations of reason itself. Why does a man like the Joker exist? What confluence of tragedy and madness and cruel chance births a creature capable of such senseless, gleeful destruction? What happened to him to twist a human being into something that wears human skin but operates by rules no sane mind can comprehend? Gotham has asked this question for years. Gotham's finest detectives, its most celebrated psychiatrists, its most ruthless criminals, all have tried to understand the man who calls himself the Joker, and all have failed. Because the Joker is not a puzzle to be solved. He is not a code to be cracked. He is chaos given form, madness made manifest, and his origins are as slippery and contradictory as the man himself. Some say he was a failed comedian, a gentle soul crushed by circumstance until he snapped. Others claim he was always a monster, a cold-blooded killer who adopted the clown persona as a theatrical flourish. Still others whisper that he is not one man at all but many, a legacy of lunacy passed down through generations. The truth? The truth is that the Joker prefers it this way. He has told his origin story a dozen different ways to a dozen different people, each version more tragic or more ridiculous than the last, and he laughs at all of them equally. If I'm going to have a past, he once said to the Batman, their faces inches apart in the rain-soaked darkness of Crime Alley, I prefer it to be multiple choice, but there are threads, patterns, moments that appear in enough accounts to suggest something approaching truth. And to understand the horror that visited Barbara Gordon that night, to understand the full scope of the nightmare her father would endure in the hours that followed, one must first attempt to understand the impossible, the origin of the clown prince of crime. It begins, as so many tragedies do, with a man who had nothing left to lose. It begins with a red hood and a chemical bath, and a scream that echoed off the walls of Ace Chemicals and never really stopped. It begins with the night a nobody became a nightmare, when Gotham's underworld witnessed the birth of something it could not control, and the Batman gained an enemy he would never truly defeat. Pull back from Barbara Gordon's hospital bed. Pull back from the Commissioner's screams, echoing through an abandoned amusement park. Pull back from the Joker's laughter cutting through the night like broken glass. Pull back far enough, and you will see the shape of the story, a story of madness and obsession, of love twisted into possession, of a city held hostage by a single maniac's vision. This is the lore of the Joker. This is the chronicle of Gotham's greatest monster. And like all the best horror stories, it does not begin with the monster. It begins with the man he used to be. The files in Arkham Asylum's records department stretch back over a century. Yellowed papers in manila folders, crumbling at the edges like autumn leaves. Microfiche reels containing the documented madness of generations. Digital databases that hum with the accumulated case histories of Gotham's most disturbed minds. Psychiatrists have spent entire careers within these archives, mapping the topography of insanity, searching for patterns in the chaos of broken psyches, and yet, despite decades of study, despite hundreds of interviews and thousands of pages of analysis, one file remains stubbornly, impossibly incomplete. Patient 479, the Joker. His folder is thicker than most, not because it contains more information, but because it contains more contradictions. Every psychiatrist who has sat across from him in those cold interview rooms has emerged with a different story. Every attempt to construct a coherent timeline of his life before the clown makeup has collapsed into paradox and impossibility. The man who terrorizes Gotham with such theatrical precision seems to have materialized from nowhere, a nightmare without a dreamer, a punchline without a setup. Dr. Harleen Quinzel, before her own descent into madness, once described the experience of interviewing him as trying to hold water in your hands. The moment you think you have grasped something solid, something true, it slips through your fingers and leaves you with nothing but the sensation of wetness and the suspicion that you have been played for a fool. The Joker knows this. He revels in it. "If I'm going to have a past," he told Batman during one of their countless confrontations, rain streaming down both their faces in the neon-lit darkness of the Narrows, "I prefer it to be multiple choice." This is not evasion. This is philosophy. The Joker has elevated the destruction of his own history into an art form, a deliberate rejection of the narrative structures that define ordinary human existence. Most people cling to their pasts, their childhoods, their formative experiences, the stories they tell themselves about who they are and why they became that way. The Joker has severed those anchors. He drifts free in an eternal present, unbound by the weight of memory, capable of reinventing himself with every telling. To understand why this matters, one must first understand what the Joker represents. He is not merely a criminal. Gotham has no shortage of criminals, thieves and murderers, mob bosses and contract killers, corrupt politicians and dirty cops. The Joker transcends these categories. He is chaos personified, entropy given a grinning face and a purple suit, and chaos by its very nature has no origin. Chaos simply is. It exists in the spaces between order, in the cracks that form when systems break down, in the laughter that bubbles up when everything falls apart. By refusing to have a definitive past, the Joker becomes something more than human. He becomes an idea, a force, a symbol as potent in its way as the bat that strikes fear into criminal hearts. Batman built his mythology deliberately, crafting an identity designed to inspire terror in the guilty. The Joker has achieved something similar through the opposite method, not construction, but destruction. Not the careful assembly of a legend, but the systematic demolition of anything that might make him comprehensible. And yet, there are stories, fragments that surface, again and again, in different forms and from different sources, suggesting that beneath the grease paint and the madness there was once a man. A human being with a name and a history and perhaps even hopes and dreams before the world crushed them into powder. The first and oldest theory paints him as a career criminal from the very beginning. In the earliest accounts of his crimes, dating back to his first documented appearance in Gotham decades ago, the Joker operated with a cold, calculating efficiency that suggested years of experience in the underworld. He announced his murders in advance, broadcasting his intentions over the radio waves with chilling confidence, then executed his plans with military precision. This version of the Joker was no madman. He was a mastermind, a criminal genius who adopted the clown motif as a form of psychological warfare, using fear and unpredictability as weapons as lethal as any gun or knife. Some investigators have linked this early Joker to the Red Hood Gang, a notorious criminal organization that plagued Gotham in the years before Batman's emergence. The Red Hood identity was passed between multiple criminals, a rotating disguise that allowed the gang's true leadership to remain anonymous. Could the Joker have been one of these hooded figures? Could he have been their leader? The evidence is circumstantial at best, buried beneath layers of time and the deliberate obfuscation that characterizes everything about the man. But the connection persists in the whispered theories of Gotham's criminal historians, a thread that links the Joker's present to a past as murky as the Gotham River. The second theory could not be more different. This is the version immortalized in the case files of Arkham Asylum, the story the Joker himself has told most frequently, though frequently is a relative term when discussing a man who lies as easily as breathing. In this telling, the Joker was once a struggling comedian, a nobody, a man, named, well, the name changes with each telling, if a name is given at all. What remains consistent is the desperation, a man trying to make people laugh, failing night after night in dingy comedy clubs where the audiences were too drunk or too tired or too cynical to appreciate his material, a man watching his dreams curdle into bitterness, while the bills piled up and the landlord's threats grew more insistent. This comedian had a wife. Jeannie, her name was, in most versions of the story, pregnant with their first child, the light of his miserable life, the one good thing in a world that seemed determined to grind him into dust. He loved her with the desperate intensity of a drowning man clinging to a piece of driftwood, and she loved him back, believed in him, encouraged him, told him that his big break was just around the corner, even when both of them knew it was probably a lie. To provide for his growing family, this failed comedian made a deal with the devil, or rather with the devils who ran Gotham's underworld. They needed someone to guide them through the Ace Chemicals plant, someone who had worked there briefly, someone who knew the layout. In exchange for this service, they would pay him enough to cover months of rent, enough to give his wife and unborn child a fighting chance. He would wear the red hood that marked members of the gang, concealing his identity, and if everything went according to plan, no one would ever know he had been involved. Nothing went according to plan. On the very day of the heist, tragedy struck. Jeannie died. The details vary. A household accident in some tellings, a random act of violence in others. The result was the same. The comedian arrived at the meeting point hollowed out, a walking corpse in a cheap suit, and when he tried to back out of the arrangement, the criminals would not let him. They had invested too much. They needed their inside man. And so, with a gun pressed against his spine and his wife's blood, still metaphorically wet on his hands, the comedian put on the red hood and walked into Ace Chemicals, where the Batman was waiting. This version of the story positions the Joker as a victim, a tragic figure crushed by circumstance, transformed into a monster not by choice but by the cruelty of a universe that delights in punishing the innocent. It is, perhaps not coincidentally, the version that generates the most sympathy, and the Joker has never been above manipulating sympathy when it serves his purposes. How much of it is true? How much is embellishment, exaggeration, outright fabrication? The Joker himself would never tell you. Or rather, he would tell you a dozen different answers, each delivered with the same apparent sincerity, each contradicting the others in fundamental ways. The third theory is darker still. This version suggests that the man who became the Joker was never innocent, that the comedian story is a fiction designed to generate exactly the kind of sympathy described above. In this telling, the Joker was always a predator, a serial killer operating in Gotham's shadows long before he donned the purple suit and white makeup. The chemical bath did not create his madness, it merely gave it a face. The transformation was cosmetic, not psychological. Beneath the bleached skin and the green hair, the same monster that had always lurked there simply found a more theatrical way to express itself. There is evidence for this theory too. Unsolved murders from before the Joker's official emergence, cases that bear his signature flourishes, the playing cards left at crime scenes, the grotesque smiles carved into victims' faces, cold cases that Gotham's detectives have never been able to close, crimes that might represent the Joker's early work, his apprenticeship in horror before he graduated to the grand guignol performances that would make him infamous. Which version is true? Perhaps all of them, perhaps none. The brilliant and terrible insight of Grant Morrison's interpretation, developed during his landmark run writing Batman comics, suggests that the Joker possesses what might be called super sanity. His mind operates on a level beyond ordinary human cognition, constantly reinventing itself to adapt to new circumstances. He does not have a single fixed personality, but rather a fluid identity that shifts and changes like quicksilver. The cold killer of the 1940s, the campy prankster of the 1960s, the homicidal psychopath of the modern era. These are not contradictions but evolutions, different versions of the same essential chaos expressing itself through different masks. If this theory holds, then asking, who is the Joker really, is fundamentally the wrong question. There is no really. There is no bedrock truth beneath the layers of performance and deception. The Joker is whoever he needs to be in the moment, and the past he claims depends entirely on what effect he wishes to achieve. To his psychiatrists, he is a tragic victim deserving of sympathy. To Batman, he is a dark mirror reflecting the hero's own potential for madness. To his victims, he is simply death wearing a smile. The files in Arkham Asylum will never be complete. The true name of the man who became the Joker, if there ever was a true name, if there ever was a man, may be lost forever in the toxic soup of chemicals and shattered psyche that birthed the clown prince of crime. And perhaps that is exactly as it should be. Perhaps the mystery is the point. Perhaps the not knowing is what makes him so terrifying, so impossible to predict, so eternally fascinating to the citizens of Gotham who whisper his name like a curse. What we can know, what the evidence does support across multiple sources and countless retellings, is that there was a night at Ace Chemicals. There was a man in a red hood. There was a confrontation with the Batman, a fall into bubbling vats of toxic waste, and an emergence that changed everything. Before that night, whoever he was, the Joker was human. After that night, he became something else entirely. The chemicals stripped away his skin and replaced it with chalk-white horror. They burned away his hair and regrew it in poisonous green. They carved a permanent smile into his face, a rictus grin that would haunt Gotham's nightmares for generations. And they did something to his mind, broke it, rewired it, transformed it into an engine of chaos that would never stop running. This much is certain. This much at least we can trace. The origin of the Joker is not a story of what happened to a man. It is a story of what happened to a man's humanity and what crawled out of the wreckage when that humanity was gone. The Red Hood awaits. The chemicals bubble and hiss, and somewhere in the depths of Ace Chemicals, a criminal is about to become a legend. Gotham's city in the years before the Bat was a different kind of darkness. Not better, not safer, simply different. Darkness without hope, without the promise of justice swooping down from the rooftops to balance the scales. The mob ruled with an iron fist wrapped in expensive Italian leather. The Falcone family, the Moroni syndicate, a dozen smaller operations carving up the city's flesh like butchers dividing a carcass, each taking their cut of the gambling dens and protection rackets and smuggling routes that kept the blood money flowing. The police were bought and paid for, their badges little more than decorations signifying which criminal organisation owned their loyalty. And the citizens, the ordinary people trying to live ordinary lives in this extraordinary hellscape, kept their heads down, their mouths shut, and their prayers whispered in the dark. This was the Gotham that birthed the Red Hood gang. They emerged from the shadows of the East End, a crew of professional criminals distinguished by their signature headgear, smooth, featureless domes of crimson that concealed their identities completely. No eye holes, no mouth slits, just polished red surfaces that reflected the frightened faces of their victims. The design was practical as much as theatrical. Witnesses could describe nothing useful to police. Security cameras captured only that uniform, anonymous crimson, and the psychological effect was profound. There is something deeply unsettling about a face without features, a human form stripped of its humanity. The genius of the Red Hood identity lay in its transferability. Unlike the costumed criminals who would later plague Gotham, each with their distinct personas and recognizable signatures, the Red Hood was designed to be worn by anyone. The gang's leadership rotated the hood among its members, ensuring that even if one Red Hood was captured or killed, another would simply take his place. The identity was immortal because it belonged to no one. It was a role, not a person, a mask that could be passed from hand to hand like a cursed artifact, carrying with it all the fear and notoriety the previous wearers had accumulated. For years, the Red Hood gang operated with impunity. They robbed banks and hijacked shipments. They extorted businesses and eliminated rivals. They moved through Gotham's underworld like ghosts in crimson, and the police, those who were not on their payroll, could never seem to catch more than low-level operatives who knew nothing of value. The true leadership remained hidden, protected by layers of anonymity and the simple elegance of their interchangeable disguise. Then the Batman arrived. The Dark Knight's emergence changed the calculus of crime in Gotham overnight. Suddenly, the shadows that had always belonged to criminals had a new occupant, a predator that hunted predators, a nightmare that gave nightmares to those who had long considered themselves the monsters under the bed. The old mob families found their operations disrupted, their soldiers beaten and gift-wrapped for the police, their safe houses raided by a figure in black who seemed to materialize from the darkness itself. For the first time in living memory, crime in Gotham became genuinely dangerous. The Red Hood gang adapted. They always adapted. It was the secret of their longevity. They became more cautious, more selective in their targets, more ruthless in eliminating potential witnesses, and they began planning something ambitious, something that would fund their operations for years to come and cement their reputation as the most untouchable criminal organization in the city. The Ace Chemicals heist. Ace Chemicals was a sprawling industrial complex on Gotham's waterfront, a maze of processing plants and storage facilities and administrative buildings connected by catwalks and pipes, and the ever-present vats of toxic compounds that gave the company its name. The security was formidable: armed guards, electronic surveillance, multiple redundant alarm systems. But the real treasure was not in the vaults or the safes. It was in the research division, where Ace's scientists developed proprietary chemical formulas worth millions to the right buyers. Corporate espionage was a lucrative business, and the Red Hood gang had already lined up a client willing to pay handsomely for Ace's secrets. There was just one problem. The complex was too large, too labyrinthine, for the gang to navigate without inside help. They needed someone who knew the layout, someone who had walked those corridors, who understood which security checkpoints could be bypassed and which had to be neutralized. Someone desperate enough to betray their former employer for the right price. They found their man in a comedy club. He was dying on stage when they first spotted him. Not literally, though by the end of the night he might have wished for that mercy. The comedian stood in a single spotlight, sweat beading on his forehead, his hands trembling around the microphone as joke after joke landed with the dull thud of a body hitting concrete. The audience was sparse, bored, already signalling to the bartender for refills rather than listening to his material. He was not without talent. There were flashes of genuine wit buried in his routine, moments that might have landed with a more receptive crowd. But talent means nothing without timing, and his timing was catastrophic. The gang's recruiters watched from a back booth, nursing watered-down drinks and seeing something the comedian himself could not. They saw desperation. They saw a man at the end of his rope barely clinging to his dreams while reality pulled him inexorably toward the rocks below. And they saw, in the employee badge still clipped to his jacket, Ace Chemicals Research Division, clearly forgotten in his rush to make his set time, the answer to their problems. The approach came after the show, in the alley behind the club where the comedian was leaning against a dumpster and staring at the sky as if searching for stars that Gotham's light pollution had long since erased. They were polite, professional. They explained the opportunity in terms that emphasized the money and downplayed the risk. One night's work, a simple guided tour through familiar corridors, enough cash to cover his rent for a year, maybe two, enough to give him the breathing room to pursue his comedy career without the constant terror of eviction notices and disconnected utilities. He said no. Of course he said no. He was not a criminal. He was a comedian. A failed comedian, perhaps, but still a man with principles, with a sense of right and wrong that had survived Gotham's corrosive influence. He had a wife at home, Jeannie, beautiful, patient Jeannie, who worked double shifts at the diner to cover the bills he could not pay, who rubbed his shoulders after bad gigs and told him that tomorrow would be better, who was carrying their first child in her belly and still found the energy to believe in him when he had long since stopped believing in himself. He could not risk everything they had built, fragile and precarious as it was, for a criminal enterprise. He could not become the kind of man who betrayed his employer, who consorted with gangsters, who abandoned his principles for a fistful of dirty money. He told them no, and he meant it, and he walked home that night feeling something almost like pride. The gang did not accept rejection gracefully. They returned the following week with a different approach, less polite, less professional. They explained in terms that left no room for misinterpretation that his participation was no longer optional. They had done their research. They knew about Jeannie. They knew about the baby. They knew the address of their cramped apartment, the route she walked to work, the name of the obstetrician she visited every other Thursday. The implication was clear. The choice was simple. He could help them willingly and receive the promised payment, or he could refuse and watch everything. He loved to be destroyed. Still, he resisted. He was not a brave man. He knew this about himself, had always known it. But the thought of his wife in danger, the thought of criminal hands reaching toward her swollen belly, filled him with a terror that transcended self-preservation. He went to the police. He tried to report the threats. But the officer who took his statement had dead eyes and a knowing smirk, and the comedian realized with sinking horror that he was speaking to a man on the gang's payroll. His report would go nowhere. Worse, it would go directly to the people he was trying to escape. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. He performed his comedy sets like a man walking to the gallows, the jokes tasting like ash in his mouth. And slowly, inevitably, his resistance crumbled, not because he stopped caring about right and wrong, but because he cared more about Jeannie, more about the baby, more about the tiny, fragile life they were building together than about abstract principles that could not protect them from concrete threats. He agreed to help. The night of the heist was set for a Friday. The comedian, though he barely felt like a comedian anymore, barely felt like anything human, spent the preceding days in a fog of dread and resignation. He memorized the floor plans they gave him. He rehearsed the routes, the timing, the security codes he had retained from his brief employment. He told Jeannie he had a late gig, kissing her goodbye with a desperation she must have noticed but did not question. She trusted him. After everything, she still trusted him. That trust would be the last gift she ever gave him. The call came 2 hours before the heist was scheduled to begin. The comedian was in his dressing room at the club, not performing, just hiding, trying to gather the courage to walk toward the rendezvous point, when his phone rang. The voice on the other end was clinical, professional, utterly devoid of sympathy. There had been an accident. A malfunction in the space heater Jeannie used to warm their drafty apartment. A fire, contained but fatal. His wife was dead. His unborn child was dead. Everything he had been trying to protect, everything he had compromised his soul to save, was gone. He does not remember hanging up the phone. He does not remember the minutes that followed, the howling void that opened in his chest and swallowed every coherent thought. When awareness returned, he was standing on a street corner in the rain, and 2 men in dark coats were gripping his arms, and they were telling him it was time to go. He tried to explain. His wife. The baby. He could not do this tonight. He could not do anything tonight. He needed to go home, needed to see the body, needed to begin the impossible process of understanding how the universe could be so comprehensively cruel. The men did not care. The heist was happening with or without his willing participation. He knew the layout, he knew the codes. If he refused to walk, they would drag him. If he refused to talk, they would hurt him until he did. His grief was irrelevant to their calculations. His humanity was irrelevant. He was a tool, and tools do not get to mourn. They put the red hood over his head. The world became crimson-tinted darkness, his own breath hot and loud in the enclosed space. He could barely see through the narrow eye slits, could barely think through the fog of shock and sorrow. But his feet remembered the way, his mouth remembered the codes, and so he walked through the rain toward Ace Chemicals, walked through the security checkpoints that opened at his command, walked deeper and deeper into the maze of catwalks and vats and humming machinery. He was not thinking about escape. He was not thinking about survival. He was thinking about Jeannie's smile, about the names they had been considering for the baby, about the future that had been stolen from him by a faulty heater and the cruel mathematics of chance. That was when the Batman appeared. The Dark Knight materialized from the shadows like a nightmare given form, cape billowing, eyes white and pitiless behind that cowled mask. The gang members scattered, their professional composure shattering in the face of Gotham's legendary terror. Gunshots rang out, echoing off metal walls. Men screamed. The carefully planned heist devolved into chaos in a matter of seconds, and the comedian, the failed comedian, the grieving husband, the man in the red hood, found himself alone on a catwalk above the chemical vats, with nowhere to run and nothing left to lose. Batman was coming. Behind him, the gang survivors were either fleeing or fighting, and neither option offered him salvation. Below him, the vats bubbled with compounds whose names he could not remember, but whose toxicity he understood all too well. And ahead of him, advancing with implacable purpose, was the creature that had become Gotham's boogeyman. The comedian looked at the Dark Knight. He looked at the churning chemicals below. He thought of Jeannie. He thought of the baby. He thought of the meaningless joke his life had become, a setup without a punchline, a story without an ending, a man without a future. He stepped off the catwalk, or he was pushed, or he slipped. The accounts vary, and the man himself would later claim not to remember. What is certain is that he fell through the acrid air, fell toward the bubbling surface of the vat, fell away from everything he had been and toward something new and terrible and utterly incomprehensibly other. The chemicals embraced him like a lover. The pain embraced him like a god. And somewhere in the depths of that toxic baptism, the comedian died. What crawled out of the drainage pipe into Gotham Harbour was not a comedian, was not a husband, was not a father who never got to hold his child. What crawled out was laughing. The fall lasted forever. The fall lasted no time at all. Later, when psychiatrists asked him to describe the moment of his transformation, the Joker would offer a different answer each time. Sometimes he spoke of peaceful acceptance, a surrender to gravity and fate that felt almost religious in its totality. Sometimes he described screaming terror, his hands clawing uselessly at empty air as the catwalk receded above him, and the bubbling surface rushed up to meet him. Sometimes he simply laughed and changed the subject, leaving his interrogators to wonder if he remembered anything at all, or if the memory itself had been dissolved along with everything else. What we know, what can be reconstructed from the physical evidence and the fragmentary accounts of those who witnessed the aftermath, is this. A man fell into a vat of chemical waste at the Ace Chemicals processing plant on a rainy night in Gotham City. The specific compound was a proprietary mixture, details classified, but analysis of residue suggested a cocktail of industrial solvents, experimental polymers, and substances whose effects on human tissue had never been properly studied. The vat's contents were heated to approximately 170 degrees Fahrenheit for processing purposes. The man who entered that chemical soup was wearing a red hood that offered no protection whatsoever. He should have died. By every reasonable measure of biology and chemistry, the immersion should have been fatal within seconds. The heat alone would cause severe burns. The chemical composition would attack exposed skin, mucous membranes, the delicate tissues of eyes and lungs. The combination of factors, thermal trauma, chemical burns, toxic absorption, shock, should have produced a corpse, not a criminal mastermind. And yet, the man did not die. Something in his physiology, some quirk of genetics or sheer cosmic spite, allowed him to survive what should have been unsurvivable. Perhaps the red hood created a temporary air pocket. Perhaps the specific chemical mixture, through some dark alchemy, cauterized wounds even as it created them. Perhaps, and this is the explanation the Joker himself seems to favor, the universe simply was not finished with him yet. The joke was not complete. The punchline had not been delivered, and so the man who should have died was instead transformed. Beneath the surface of the chemical vat, time ceased to have meaning. The comedian, if we can still call him that, if there was still enough of him left to deserve a human designation, experienced something beyond pain. Pain implies a nervous system functioning normally, sending distress signals that the brain can interpret and respond to. What he experienced was more fundamental. It was dissolution. It was rebirth. It was the systematic destruction of everything he had been, cell by cell, thought by thought, memory by memory. The chemicals burned through his skin and found something deeper. They seeped into his bloodstream and rewrote his biology. They penetrated his skull and touched his brain, those delicate folds of grey matter that contained his identity, his memories, his capacity for reason and empathy and hope. And where they touched, they transformed. Neural pathways that had processed the world in one way were severed, rerouted, reconnected in configurations that no neuroscientist could have predicted. The architecture of his mind was demolished and rebuilt, according to blueprints that existed nowhere in nature. He was aware in some distant way of his body convulsing, of his lungs filling with liquid fire, of his eyes. Oh God, his eyes, the chemicals finding those delicate orbs and remaking them into something that would see the world differently forever after. He was aware of his skin sloughing away and new skin growing in its place, pale as moonlight, white as bone, stretched tight over features that would never again be mistaken for ordinary. He was aware of his hair, brown, unremarkable, the hair of a failed comedian who had never stood, out in any crowd, falling out in clumps and being replaced by something vivid, something that seemed to glow with its own sickly luminescence, green as poison, green as envy, green as the colour of things that grow in the dark. And through it all, through every moment of that impossible transformation, he was aware of one thing above all others, the joke. It came to him in the chemical darkness like a revelation, like the voice of a god that existed only in the spaces between sanity and madness. The joke was everything. The joke was his wife dying on the same day he compromised his principles to save her. The joke was the universe dangling happiness in front of him and snatching it away at the last possible moment. The joke was the absurdity of existence itself, the random cruelty, the meaningless suffering, the pretense that any of it mattered when entropy always won in the end. The joke was that he had tried so hard to be good, to be decent, to be the kind of man who deserved a happy ending, and the universe had responded by destroying everything he loved and drowning him in poison. The joke was hilarious. The joke was the funniest thing he had ever heard. And so, in the depths of the chemical vat, suspended between life and death, between the man he had been and the monster he was becoming, the comedian did the only thing that made sense anymore. He laughed. The laugh bubbled up through the toxic soup, breaking the surface in a stream of caustic bubbles. It was not a human laugh, not anymore. It was something primal and broken, something that had been twisted by the same forces that were twisting his body. It was the sound of a mind shattering into 1,000 pieces, and those pieces rearranging themselves into a new configuration. A configuration that found everything funny, because the alternative was to find everything unbearable. The drainage system at Ace Chemicals was designed to handle overflow from the processing vats. Pipes led from the bottom of each container to a central collection point, which in turn emptied into Gotham Harbour through a series of filtration stages that were supposed to remove the most dangerous contaminants before they reached the open water. On the night of the Red Hood heist, those filtration systems were overwhelmed. The chaos of the Batman's intervention had triggered emergency shutoffs and pressure releases, and the chemical soup that had transformed the comedian was flushed through the system, largely unprocessed. The pipe emptied onto the rocky shore of Gotham Harbour, a stretch of industrial wasteland where the city's refuse accumulated in toxic drifts. The rain was still falling, had been falling all night, as if the sky itself was weeping for what was about to be unleashed upon the world. And from that pipe, coughing and choking and still somehow laughing, a figure emerged. He crawled across the rocks on hands and knees, leaving smears of chemical residue in his wake. His red hood was gone, dissolved or lost somewhere in the drainage system. His clothes hung in tatters, burned through in places, adhering to his transformed flesh in others, and his face was a ruin and a revelation, a horror and a work of art. The first glimpse came in a puddle of rainwater, caught between two rocks and reflecting the distant glow of Gotham's lights. He looked down and saw a stranger looking back, skin the colour of bleached parchment, hair that stood in wild green spikes, defying gravity and good taste, and the smile that had been carved into his face by the chemical burn, the rictus grin that stretched from ear to ear, that exposed too many teeth and gave his features the appearance of a skull wrapped in white leather. He touched his face with trembling fingers. The skin was smooth, almost waxy, and utterly numb. He could feel the pressure of his fingertips, but not the texture, not the warmth. It was as if he was touching someone else's face, a mask that had been grafted onto his skull while he was not paying attention. He traced the contours of that impossible smile, feeling the way the corners of his mouth curved upward even when he tried to frown, even when he tried to scream, and he understood. The man he had been, the comedian, the husband, the father who never was, that man was dead, drowned in a vat of chemicals and flushed out with the industrial waste. What remained was something new, something that had been born in pain and madness and the cosmic joke of existence, something that looked at the world through eyes that had seen the truth behind the curtain and found it hilarious. He began to laugh again. Not the broken, bubbling laugh from the vat, but something fuller, richer, more assured. A laugh that seemed to echo off the rocks and the water and the distant towers of Gotham City. A laugh that announced his presence to the world, that served as both birth cry and declaration of intent. The rain continued to fall, the chemicals continued to leach from his transformed skin into the harbour waters, and somewhere in the city, the Batman was cataloguing the night's events, recording the capture of the Red Hood gang's surviving members, noting the apparent death of one unidentified accomplice who had fallen into the chemical vats during the confrontation. The Dark Knight did not know, could not have known, what that fall had created. He did not understand that in his pursuit of justice, in his relentless war on crime, he had inadvertently forged his own nemesis. The Red Hood had been a criminal, yes, but a human criminal, bound by human motivations and human limitations. What emerged from that drainage pipe was something else entirely, something that would haunt Batman's nights and challenge his principles and push him to the very edge of his famous moral code. The symmetry was almost too perfect. Both of them had been born from tragedy. Both of them had been transformed by a single terrible night. Bruce Wayne had watched his parents die in a dirty alley and had emerged from that trauma as the Batman, a creature of darkness devoted to ensuring that no one else would suffer, as he had suffered. The comedian had lost his wife, his child, his identity, his very humanity, and had emerged from his trauma as something else, something that looked at Batman's noble mission and saw only another joke, another absurdity in a universe full of absurdities. They were mirrors, dark reflections of each other, separated only by the choices they had made in response to their pain. Batman had channeled his grief into purpose, into discipline, into an unbreakable code that gave structure to his crusade. The Joker had surrendered to the chaos, had embraced the randomness and cruelty that the universe seemed to dish out with such enthusiastic abandon. One had responded to meaninglessness by creating meaning. The other had responded by laughing at the very concept. This dynamic, this terrible symbiotic relationship would define Gotham for decades to come. Every confrontation between the Bat and the Clown would carry the weight of that origin story, that shared trauma, that fundamental philosophical disagreement about the nature of existence itself. The Joker would spend the rest of his career trying to prove his worldview correct, trying to demonstrate that anyone, even the incorruptible Batman, was only one bad day away from becoming exactly like him. And Batman would spend his career proving the opposite, holding to his code even when the Joker pushed him to his absolute limits, refusing to kill even when killing seemed like the only rational response. But all of that lay in the future. On that rainy night on the shores of Gotham Harbour, there was only a transformed figure rising slowly to his feet, testing limbs that felt unfamiliar, exploring a body that no longer operated by the rules he had always known. The pain had faded, not disappeared entirely but retreated to a manageable background hue, the kind of constant discomfort one could learn to live with. His vision had changed too. Colours seemed brighter, edges sharper, the world rendered in a kind of hyper-real clarity that made everything look simultaneously more vivid and more ridiculous. He took a step, then another. His legs remembered how to walk even if his mind was still assembling itself from the wreckage. He moved away from the water, away from the industrial wasteland, toward the distant lights of the city proper. He did not know where he was going. He did not have a plan. He only knew that the world that had destroyed him was out there, continuing to turn as if nothing had changed, as if his wife was not dead and his child was not unborn, and his entire previous existence had not been revealed as a cruel prank played by an indifferent cosmos. He would show them. He would show them all. The joke was funny, yes. The absurdity of existence was hilarious. But the truly funny thing, the thing that made him want to laugh until his transformed lungs gave out, was that no one else seemed to get it. They walked through their lives as if everything mattered, as if their little dramas and ambitions and moral codes meant something in the face of entropy. They clung to their sanity like drowning men clinging to driftwood, never understanding that the water was going to win eventually, that everyone drowned in the end, that the only sane response to an insane world was to embrace the madness and laugh. He would teach them. One way or another, he would make them understand. The figure that had once been a comedian disappeared into the Gotham night, leaving only chemical stains and lingering laughter in his wake. He had no name anymore. The name he had been born with belonged to a dead man, and dead men have no use for names. He had no identity, no history, no past. He was a blank slate written in white skin and green hair, and a smile that would never fade. He would need a new name, a new identity, something that captured the essential truth he had discovered in the depths of the chemical vat, something funny. The rain continued to fall on Gotham City. The Batman continued his patrol, unaware that the most dangerous night of his career was not the one just ending, but the countless ones to come. The Red Hood gang was broken, their heist foiled, their members scattered to prison cells and shallow graves. And somewhere in the labyrinthine streets of the East End, a monster was being born. Not created. Born. Because the Joker did not spring fully formed from the chemical bath like Athena from the head of Zeus. He evolved. He experimented. He tried on different personas and different methods, discarding what did not work, refining what did. The clown makeup came later, a theatrical choice that transformed his chemical disfigurement into a deliberate statement. The purple suit came later, a costume that announced his presence with aristocratic flair. The weapons, the chattering teeth, the joy buzzers, the countless variations on the Joker toxin that would become his signature, All of these came later, developed through trial and error and a creativity that bordered on genius. But the essential nature, the core of what the Joker would become, was established on that night. A man who had lost everything and found, in that loss, a terrible kind of freedom. A philosopher of chaos who believed that the universe was a joke and humanity was the punchline. A mirror held up to Gotham's protector, reflecting back everything the Dark Knight feared he might become. The transformation was complete. The clown prince of crime had been crowned, and Gotham, poor, doomed, beautiful Gotham, had no idea what was coming. The radio crackled to life at precisely 8 o'clock in the evening. Every station in Gotham, every frequency from the emergency bands to the commercial broadcasts, was suddenly overtaken by a single voice. It was high-pitched and nasal, with an undercurrent of amusement that made listeners instinctively uneasy. The voice did not introduce itself. It did not explain how it had hijacked the airwaves of an entire city. It simply began speaking, and the words it spoke would be seared into Gotham's collective memory forever. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Though let's be honest, nothing you were doing was really that important, was it? I'm calling to announce a death. Not just any death, mind you, a very specific death. At midnight tonight, Henry Claridge will die. The famous Henry Claridge, millionaire philanthropist, collector of rare jewels, pillar of the community, dead as a doornail by the stroke of 12, and there's nothing, absolutely nothing, anyone can do to stop it." The voice paused, and in that pause every listener could hear something that chilled them to the bone. Laughter. "Oh, and one more thing. After dear Henry shuffles off this mortal coil, I'll be helping myself to the Claridge diamond. Consider it a finder's fee. This message has been brought to you by your new favourite entertainer. You can call me the Joker." The broadcast ended as abruptly as it had begun. Gotham's police department mobilised with unprecedented speed. Henry Claridge was placed under armed guard, a dozen officers stationed throughout his mansion, with more patrolling the grounds. The Claridge diamond was secured in the mansion's vault, protected by the most sophisticated alarm systems money could buy. And hovering at the edges of the operation, watching from the shadows, the Batman waited for the threat to materialise. Midnight came. Henry Claridge was sitting in his study, surrounded by armed guards, when his face suddenly contorted into an expression of pure agony. His hands flew to his throat, his eyes bulged, and then, impossibly, horrifyingly, his features twisted into a smile, a wide, frozen grin that stretched his face into a grotesque parody of joy. He collapsed forward onto his desk, dead before his head hit the polished wood. The guards searched the room in a panic. The windows were locked, the doors had been watched, no one had entered or left. And yet Henry Claridge was dead, his face locked in that terrible smile as if death itself had told him the funniest joke in the universe. The Claridge diamond was gone, vanished from its vault despite the alarms that had never triggered, despite the locks that showed no signs of tampering. In its place was a single playing card, the Joker from a standard deck grinning up at the investigators with the same mocking expression that would become synonymous with terror in Gotham City. This was the world's introduction to the Joker, not a gradual emergence, not a slow build of criminal activity that allowed law enforcement to develop a profile. He arrived fully formed, already operating at a level of sophistication that baffled the police and intrigued the Batman. The radio broadcast demonstrated technical capability and theatrical flair. The Impossible Murder demonstrated either supernatural power or a genius-level understanding of chemistry and infiltration. The theft of the diamond demonstrated that beneath the apparent madness was a calculating criminal mind that knew exactly what it wanted and exactly how to get it. The method, investigators would later determine, was poison. A slow-acting toxin administered hours before the announced time of death, triggered to reach lethal concentration at precisely midnight. The delivery mechanism was never conclusively identified. Perhaps contaminated food, perhaps a doctored drink, perhaps something even more subtle. What mattered was the effect. What mattered was that the Joker had demonstrated he could kill anyone, anywhere, at any time of his choosing, and he was not finished. Over the following weeks, the pattern repeated with nightmarish consistency. The Joker would announce his victims in advance, broadcasting their names and the times of their deaths across Gotham's airwaves. The police would mobilise, elaborate protective measures would be implemented, and invariably, impossibly, the victims would die exactly as promised, each one wearing that frozen smile, each one surrounded by guards who had witnessed nothing, each one leaving behind a Joker card and a missing valuable. Judge Drake, industrialist brain. Each death more audacious than the last, each crime more impossible to prevent. The Joker was playing a game, and the rules were his alone to dictate. He was demonstrating his superiority, rubbing Gotham's collective face in its own helplessness. And beneath the flamboyant theatrics, he was building something, a reputation, a legend, a presence in the criminal underworld that would never be challenged. The Batman watched and learned. The Dark Knight had faced criminals before, mobsters and murderers, thieves and thugs. But the Joker was something new, something that did not fit the established categories. He was not motivated by profit, though he clearly enjoyed acquiring wealth. He was not motivated by revenge, though his targets seemed deliberately chosen to maximize public impact. He was motivated by something the Batman could not immediately identify, a driving force that made his behavior unpredictable in ways that were genuinely dangerous. Their first direct confrontation came during the Joker's fifth announced murder. The target was a shipping magnate named Alfred Stryker, and the Batman had deduced the method of poison delivery in advance. He was waiting in Stryker's mansion, hidden in the shadows of the study where the previous victim had died, when the Joker arrived in person, not to commit the murder, which was already accomplished through the slow-acting toxin, but to collect his prize. The Joker stepped into the room with the casual confidence of a man walking into his own home. He was dressed immaculately, a purple suit tailored to perfection, a green vest, a boutonniere that seemed almost comically oversized. His face was painted in stark white grease paint, his lips exaggerated into a crimson smile, his eyes rimmed with dark shadows that made them appear to float in his skull like malevolent spirits. He looked, in that moment, like a nightmare dressed for a gala. "Ah," he said, his gaze finding the Batman's hiding place with unsettling accuracy. "The famous Batman. I was hoping you'd make an appearance. The papers have been full of your exploits, and I confess I've been curious. One freak to another, you might say." The confrontation that followed established the template for countless battles to come. The Joker was not a physical match for the Batman, few were, but he compensated with cunning, preparation, and a complete disregard for his own safety that made him extraordinarily difficult to anticipate. He deployed hidden weapons, a joy buzzer that delivered lethal voltage, chattering teeth that sprayed, clouds of toxic gas, a boutonniere that shot acid. He turned the mansion's own features against his pursuer, triggering traps that had been prepared in advance, creating chaos that allowed him to slip away when capture seemed certain. He escaped that night, though not before the Batman had landed several solid blows and forced him to abandon a portion of his stolen goods. But escape he did, vanishing into Gotham's labyrinthine streets with a laugh that echoed long after his physical form had disappeared. And in escaping, he revealed something crucial about himself, something that the Batman would spend decades trying to fully understand. He could have killed the Dark Knight. There were moments during their confrontation when the Joker had the upper hand, when a slightly different choice would have ended the Batman's career permanently. But he did not take those opportunities. He prolonged the fight instead, drawing it out, playing with his opponent rather than efficiently eliminating him. And when he finally fled, his parting words hung in the air like a promise. "Same time next week, Bats. I have a feeling this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." The Joker had found his audience, his perfect audience. Someone who would appreciate the artistry of his crimes, who would engage with his challenges on an intellectual level, who would provide the opposition necessary to make the game interesting. In the Batman, the Joker had discovered his reason for continuing to exist, and in that discovery, he had unwittingly revealed the key to his psychology. He did not want to win. Not really, not permanently. Winning would end the game, and the game was everything. The Joker wanted to play. He wanted to perform. He wanted to demonstrate his philosophy of chaos to someone capable of understanding it, even if that understanding came wrapped in opposition. The Batman was not his enemy. The Batman was his counterpart, his mirror, his other half. This realization would take the Dark Knight years to fully articulate and longer still to accept. In the early days of their conflict, he simply categorized the Joker as another criminal to be captured and prosecuted. The pattern seemed straightforward. The Joker would commit crimes, the Batman would pursue him. Eventually the Joker would be apprehended and sent to prison or the asylum. Justice would be served. Order would be restored. Except the Joker always escaped. Always. Without exception. No prison could hold him for long. No asylum could treat his particular brand of madness. He would spend weeks or months in custody, apparently docile, apparently cooperative, and then, without warning and without explanation, he would simply walk away. The security measures that contained other criminals seemed to part for him like curtains. The locks that kept lesser madmen in their cells opened at his approach as if recognizing their master, and each time he emerged he was more dangerous than before, more creative, more dedicated to the grand performance he had chosen as his life's work. The years that followed saw the Joker evolve through several distinct phases. In his earliest incarnation, he was a cold and calculating killer, the horror of his methods overshadowed by the precision of his planning, the theatrics serving a fundamentally practical criminal purpose. He stole fortunes. He eliminated rivals. He built a criminal empire of sorts, though one organized along principles that made sense only to him. Then came the era of restraint, the mid-century years when comic books fell under increased scrutiny, when the comics code authority mandated that criminals must never triumph and violence must never be glorified. The Joker of this period became something almost whimsical, a prankster rather than a killer, his crimes more annoying than lethal. He robbed banks using giant props and absurd gimmicks. He engaged in elaborate battles of wits with the Batman that resulted in captures and escapes, but rarely in casualties. He became, in the strange alchemy of public perception, almost lovable, a colourful villain in a world of colourful heroes, dangerous, but not truly evil. This version of the Joker was never the truth. It was a mask worn over the mask, a performance tailored to the expectations of a particular audience. Beneath the pratfalls and the giant typewriters and the schemes that seemed designed to amuse rather than harm, the same darkness still lurked. The same philosophy of chaos still drove his actions. He was simply biding his time, adapting to circumstances, waiting for the moment when he could reveal his true nature once again. That moment came with the Bronze Age of comics, when the industry's self-imposed restrictions began to loosen, and creators were once again permitted to explore genuine darkness. The Joker who emerged from this transition was recognizably the same character, but stripped of the campy veneer that had softened his edges. He killed again. He tortured. He demonstrated with renewed vigour that his apparent harmlessness had always been an act. The modern era found him in his most dangerous form yet, a Joker who could shift between personas as easily as changing clothes, who could be a giggling prankster in one moment and a remorseless murderer in the next. A Joker who had refined his methods over decades of practice, who understood the psychology of fear as thoroughly as any scientist understands his field of study. A Joker who had faced the Batman through countless incarnations and had never, not once, lost his fundamental obsession with the game they played. He had found, in his eternal conflict with the Dark Knight, something that resembled meaning. Not the conventional meaning sought by ordinary humans. Love, family, legacy, purpose. Something stranger and darker. The meaning of the eternal dance. The unending confrontation between order and chaos. The meaning of being the question to which Batman was the answer, and the answer to which Batman was the question. They needed each other. This was the terrible truth that both of them knew, but neither would admit. The Batman needed the Joker to justify his crusade, to provide an enemy worthy of his capabilities, to test the limits of his moral code. And the Joker needed the Batman to witness his performances, to appreciate his artistry, to provide the resistance that made victory meaningful, even when victory was never the point. Two freaks, bound together by trauma and philosophy and the strange geometry of Gotham City. Two halves of a whole that could never be completed. The first crimes were merely the opening act, the announcement of themes that would be developed and varied over decades of conflict, the establishment of a dynamic that would shape Gotham's destiny in ways no one could have predicted on that night, when a voice first crackled over the radio and announced a death. The game had begun, and neither player had any intention of ever letting it end. What does the Joker want? The question has haunted Gotham's criminologists, its psychiatrists, its detectives, and its vigilantes for decades. It seems like it should have a simple answer. Criminals want things: money, power, revenge, territory, respect. Their motivations can be understood, their behaviors predicted, their capture facilitated by the simple logic of following the trail of their desires. But the Joker defies this logic. He acquires fortunes and then burns them. He builds criminal empires and then destroys them on a whim. He has held the lives of thousands in his hands and released them simply because killing them had become boring. He does not want what other criminals want. This is the first and most fundamental truth about him. The Joker has been offered wealth beyond imagining. Crime lords have approached him with partnerships that would have made him the richest man in Gotham. He has laughed in their faces, sometimes literally, sometimes before killing them for the presumption. Money means nothing to him. It is a prop, a tool, a means to an end that has nothing to do with material accumulation. He will spend millions on an elaborate scheme and gain nothing tangible from its completion. The scheme itself is the reward. The execution is the payoff. He has been offered power. Positions in criminal hierarchies that would have given him control over vast networks of illegal enterprise. Political leverage that could have shaped Gotham's governance from the shadows. He has rejected these offers with the contempt they deserve, not because he lacks ambition, but because the ambition of ordinary men is too small to contain him. What use is ruling a city when you can watch it burn? What satisfaction can be found in controlling systems when the true joy lies in demonstrating how fragile those systems are? Revenge, perhaps. The Batman created him, in a sense. Without that chase through Ace Chemicals, without the fall into the vat, there would be no Joker. Surely some part of him must harbour resentment, must dream of finally destroying the creature that destroyed his former life. But the Joker's relationship with the Batman is not revenge. It is something far more complex, something that looks almost like love from certain angles, like obsession from others, like the devotion of an artist to his muse or a comedian to his audience. He does not want to destroy Batman. He wants to transform him. He wants to prove that they are the same, that the only difference between them is the arbitrary choice of how to respond to the cosmic joke of existence. So what does he want? The answer, insofar as there is one, lies in philosophy rather than psychology. The Joker is not merely a criminal, he is an ideologue. He has a world view, a comprehensive understanding of reality that shapes his every action, and his crimes are not ends in themselves but arguments in an ongoing debate about the nature of existence. The central thesis of Joker's philosophy can be stated simply: everything is meaningless, and the only rational response to meaninglessness is laughter. This is not nihilism, though it resembles nihilism from a distance. The nihilist sees the absence of inherent meaning and responds with despair or indifference. The Joker sees the same absence and responds with joy. He finds the meaninglessness hilarious. The pretensions of civilization, the elaborate systems humans construct to convince themselves that their lives matter, law, morality, religion, love, all of it strikes him as the funniest joke ever told. Not because these things are evil or foolish, but because they are so desperately, transparently fragile. Because the people who cling to them know, deep down, that they are building sandcastles at the edge of an infinite ocean. The Joker's crimes are designed to reveal this fragility. Each murder, each act of terrorism, each elaborate scheme is a demonstration of how easily order collapses into chaos. He does not kill to satisfy bloodlust or to achieve practical goals. He kills to prove a point. He kills to show the citizens of Gotham, and more importantly to show the Batman, that the structures they believe protect them are illusions. That civilization is a thin veneer over the howling void, that anyone given the right push will abandon their principles and become exactly what they claim to despise. This is the one bad day hypothesis, articulated most clearly in the events that would come to be known as the Killing Joke. The Joker believes that sanity is a collective delusion, a shared pretense that allows human beings to function in a world that offers no grounds for functioning. He believes that everyone is exactly like him, deep down, that the only difference between the madman and the citizen is that the citizen has been lucky enough to avoid the trauma that shatters the illusion. Give anyone a sufficiently terrible day, apply enough pressure to the fault lines of their psyche, and they will crack. They will see the joke. They will laugh, because laughing is the only alternative to screaming forever. His obsession with the Batman stems from this belief. The Dark Knight represents the ultimate challenge to the Joker's worldview. Here is a man who suffered unimaginable trauma, who watched his parents murdered in front of him as a child, who had every reason to descend into madness, and who emerged not broken, but hardened. Batman's mere existence is an argument against the Joker's philosophy. It suggests that humans can face the void and choose meaning anyway, can look into the abyss and build something rather than simply falling. The Joker cannot accept this. Accepting it would mean acknowledging that his own response to trauma was a choice, not an inevitability. It would mean admitting that he could have been different, could have found another way through the pain, could have emerged from that chemical bath as something other than what he became, and so he dedicates himself to breaking the Batman, to pushing the Dark Knight until he finally cracks and proves that the Joker was right all along. This philosophical dimension elevates the Joker beyond ordinary villainy. He's not a monster who happens to have ideas. He is an idea that happens to have a monster's face. His crimes are texts to be interpreted, arguments to be engaged with, challenges that demand intellectual as well as physical response. The Batman cannot simply defeat the Joker by capturing him. He must also answer the Joker's arguments, must demonstrate through his actions that order is worth preserving, that meaning can be created even in a meaningless universe, that the human capacity for good is not merely a survival mechanism, but something genuine and valuable. This is why neither of them can ever truly win. Their conflict is not about territory or resources, it is about fundamental questions of existence that cannot be resolved through violence alone. Every time the Batman captures the Joker has already scored a philosophical point by forcing the Dark Knight to the limits of his restraint. Every time the Joker escapes, he has proven that the systems designed to contain chaos are inadequate to the task. The dance continues because the dance is the point. The psychiatric community has struggled to categorize this psychology. The Joker has been diagnosed with virtually every disorder in the manual: antisocial personality, narcissism, schizophrenia, psychopathy, borderline traits. None of these labels fully capture him. They describe symptoms without explaining causes, behaviors without illuminating motivations. The Joker seems almost to exist outside the normal boundaries of mental illness, to have transcended the categories that contain other disturbed minds. Grant Morrison, during his influential examination of the Joker's psychology, proposed a radical alternative: supersanity. Rather than being insane in any conventional sense, the Joker might be too sane, might perceive reality so clearly and completely that he has moved beyond the comfortable illusions that allow the rest of us to function. His constant reinvention of his own personality, his shifting identity, his apparently random behavior patterns, these might not be symptoms of dysfunction, but adaptations to a higher level of awareness. He rewrites himself constantly because he understands that identity itself is a fiction, a story we tell ourselves to impose coherence on the chaos of experience. This interpretation is disturbing in its implications. It suggests that the Joker is not broken but evolved, not failed but transcended. It suggests that his laughter is not a symptom of his damage but a rational response to truths that the rest of us are too limited to perceive. And it suggests that his conflict with Batman is not simply good versus evil, but two different approaches to the same existential problem, one who creates meaning through order, and one who embraces meaninglessness through chaos. There are moments, scattered throughout the Joker's history, that support this interpretation. Moments of apparent lucidity where he drops the manic facade and speaks with chilling clarity about the nature of reality. Moments where he demonstrates knowledge he should not possess, awareness of contexts and consequences that a truly disordered mind would be incapable of processing. Moments where he seems to be testing his own philosophy, rather than simply enacting it, running experiments on the human condition with himself as both scientist and subject. He has told Batman, on more than one occasion, that he is aware they exist inside a narrative, that he can sense the audience watching their conflicts unfold, can feel the weight of decades of storytelling pressing down on every encounter. These metafictional gestures are often dismissed as particularly elaborate delusions, but they align uncomfortably well with the supersanity hypothesis. What if the Joker's apparent madness is actually a form of perception that allows him to see truths invisible to everyone else? What if he really does understand something about the nature of their reality that the Batman cannot or will not acknowledge? The question cannot be definitively answered. Like everything about the Joker, It exists in a state of deliberate ambiguity. He might be genuinely insane, a broken mind producing chaos because chaos is all it knows. He might be perfectly sane, a philosopher in clown makeup conducting the most elaborate thought experiment in history. He might be something in between, or something else entirely, a category of being that exists outside the normal spectrum of mental health and illness. What can be said with certainty is that he believes his philosophy completely. This is not an act. The Joker genuinely sees the universe as a joke and humanity as the punchline. He genuinely believes that chaos is the natural state of existence and that order is a temporary imposition destined to fail. He genuinely wants to help people see this truth, even if his methods of instruction involve murder and mayhem. In his own twisted way, he considers himself a liberator, someone freeing the masses from the prison of their comfortable delusions. This is what makes him so dangerous. Criminals motivated by greed can be bought off or outmaneuvered. Criminals motivated by revenge can be appeased or eliminated. But criminals motivated by philosophical conviction cannot be deterred by any means short of physical containment. The Joker will never stop because there is nothing anyone can offer him that he wants more than the continuation of his grand argument. He will never be rehabilitated because he does not believe he is sick. He will never be reasoned with because his reasoning is internally consistent, even if its premises are monstrous. The Joker is not a problem to be solved. He is a perspective to be rejected or accepted, a worldview to be defeated not through force, but through demonstration. Every time the Batman chooses not to kill him, he is making a philosophical statement, asserting that human life has value, even when the human in question has forfeited any reasonable claim to mercy. Every time the people of Gotham rebuild after the Joker's attacks, they are proving that the chaos he worships is not the final word, that meaning can be reassembled from the rubble of meaninglessness. The debate continues. It will continue as long as both of them exist, the knight and the fool, the order and the chaos, the question and the answer, locked in eternal opposition. Neither can exist without the other, neither would want to, and somewhere in the darkness of Gotham City the Joker is laughing. Not at anything in particular, not at anyone in particular, just laughing. Because what else is there to do? The implications of the Joker's philosophy extend beyond his personal conflict with the Batman. They infect everything he touches, corrupting individuals and institutions alike with the viral idea that nothing matters. His henchwomen and henchmen do not follow him for money alone. They could earn more working for more stable criminal organizations. They follow him because he offers them something more seductive than wealth. He offers them permission to abandon the exhausting pretense of civilization, permission to acknowledge the meaninglessness they have always suspected lurking beneath the surface of their lives, permission to laugh at the things they were taught to take seriously. Harley Quinn is the most famous example, but hardly the only one. The Joker has created dozens of followers over the years, each one a testament to the contagious power of his worldview. Some embrace his philosophy completely, becoming true believers in the Church of Chaos. Others are broken by their association with him, reduced to shells of their former selves, but all of them, in one way or another, are transformed by the encounter. No one walks away from extended contact with the Joker unchanged. This mimetic quality, the way his ideas spread and take root in other minds, may be his most dangerous attribute. Physical damage can be repaired. Buildings can be rebuilt. Bodies can heal or be replaced. But once the Joker's philosophy has taken hold in a person's mind, extracting it is nearly impossible. The doubt lingers. The laughter echoes. The suspicion that maybe, just maybe, the clown is right about everything becomes a splinter that cannot be removed. Gotham itself has been infected. The city's famous darkness, its reputation as a cesspool of corruption and violence, owes something to the Joker's persistent presence. He has demonstrated again and again that the systems meant to protect citizens are inadequate, that the police can be circumvented, that the courts can be manipulated, that even the Batman, for all his resources and determination, cannot prevent every atrocity. These demonstrations leave marks on the collective psyche. They erode faith in institutions. They make the Joker's philosophy seem not merely plausible, but obviously correct. This is his true victory. Not the bodies he leaves behind, not the buildings he destroys, not the fortunes he steals and burns. His true victory is the seed of doubt he plants in every mind that witnesses his work. The whispered question that follows every newscast, every emergency bulletin, every fresh horror. What if he's right? What if none of this matters? What if we're all just waiting for our own bad day? The Batman fights this infection as surely as he fights the man himself. Every rescue, every prevented crime, every demonstration that good can triumph over evil is an inoculation against the Joker's mimetic virus. The Dark Knight's mere existence, his refusal to break, his commitment to his code, his endless persistence in the face of endless opposition, is the strongest argument against the philosophy of chaos. If meaning can be created, if order can be maintained, if one man can make a difference in a city this broken, then the Joker is wrong. Then the joke is not on humanity. Then there is something worth preserving after all. The war between them is fought on two fronts. The physical front, where fists meet faces and plans are thwarted and escapes are executed. And the philosophical front, where ideas clash and worldviews compete for the soul of a city that desperately needs to believe in something. Neither front has ever seen a decisive victory. Perhaps neither ever will. The crowbar rises. The crowbar falls. The sound it makes. Metal meeting flesh. Bone cracking beneath the impact. Echoes through the empty warehouse like a drumbeat from hell. The boy on the floor tries to crawl away, his Robin uniform torn and bloodied, his face a swollen mask of purple and crimson. He is 15 years old. He's the second person to wear the mantle of Robin. The boy wonder. He's dying, and he knows it, and the man standing over him is laughing. Now, that looked like it really hurt, the Joker says, his voice carrying the conversational tone of a friend discussing the weather. He examines the crowbar in his hands, turning it this way and that, studying the blood and hair adhering to its curved surface. Whoa, now hang on. That looked like it hurt a lot more. So let's try and clear this up, okay, Pumpkin? What hurts more? A? He swings the crowbar down onto the boy's back. Or B? Another swing, this one catching the ribs. Forehand? The crowbar arcs through the air. Or backhand? Jason Todd does not scream anymore. He has moved past screaming, past the point where vocalization serves any purpose. His body absorbs each blow with a wet, meaty sound, and the only noise he makes is a ragged breathing that grows weaker with each passing moment. Blood pools beneath him, spreading across the concrete in patterns that might be beautiful if they were not so terrible. His eyes, still open, still aware, track the movement of the crowbar as it rises again, and there is something in those eyes that is not fear. Something that looks almost like defiance. The Joker notices. He always notices. A little fight in you. I like that, he says, crouching down to bring his face close to Jason's. The white grease paint is flawless, the red smile immaculate, the green hair perfectly coiffed despite the violence he's been dispensing. He looks like he is posing for a photograph. Then again, I liked Jason a lot more. You know, that whole circus act of his. The acrobatics, the smile, the boundless enthusiasm. That was entertainment. But you've always been the surly one, haven't you? The angry one, the replacement. He stands, dusting off his purple suit with the casual air of a man who has just finished a pleasant meal. Well, I'd love to stay and chat, but I'm on a bit of a tight schedule, you understand. Places to go, people to kill, arms to deal. But don't worry, I've arranged for you to go out with a bang. The Joker gestures toward the corner of the warehouse, where a device sits ticking. The bomb is not elaborate. He did not have time for elaborate, but it is sufficient. More than sufficient. Enough explosive material to reduce this building and everything in it to rubble and memory. I'll be sure to send Batman your regards. He should be here any minute now. Do you think he'll make it in time? The Joker pauses at the door, looking back over his shoulder with an expression of exaggerated curiosity. I don't. But that's the fun part, isn't it? The suspense, the hope, the crushing disappointment. He laughs, that high, manic laughter that has become the soundtrack of Gotham's nightmares, and closes the door behind him. Jason Todd is alone. The bomb ticks. He tries to move. His body refuses, systems overloaded with trauma, muscles torn and bones shattered beyond the capacity for coordinated action. He can feel himself bleeding internally, can feel the warmth spreading through his abdomen where something vital has been ruptured. The warehouse is cold, but he is not. He is burning from the inside out, and the flames have nothing to do with the explosives in the corner. He thinks of Bruce, of Alfred, of Dick Grayson, the original Robin, who had been so reluctant to accept him as a successor. He thinks of the night Bruce found him, not in a circus, not performing acrobatics, but in Crime Alley, trying to steal the tyres off the Batmobile. The sheer audacity of it, the stupidity, the beginning of everything. He had been a street kid, a survivor. His father was dead, killed by Two-Face, though Jason had not known that at the time. His mother was dead too, or so he had believed. He had been scraping by on the streets of Gotham, stealing to eat, fighting to survive, nursing a rage that had no outlet and no end. And then Batman had caught him red-handed, and instead of turning him over to the police or leaving him to the streets, the Dark Knight had seen something in him. Potential. Purpose. The raw material of a hero, buried beneath layers of anger and abandonment. The training had been brutal. Jason was not Dick Grayson, did not have the natural athleticism, the instinctive grace, the effortless charm. He had to work for everything, and the work left him exhausted and resentful, and secretly grateful for the structure it imposed on his chaotic life. Bruce was not an easy mentor. He demanded perfection, and punished failure with cold silence that cut deeper than any physical discipline. But he was also, in his own awkward way, a father. The first real father Jason had ever known. Robin had given him a purpose, a way to channel the fury that had always burned inside him towards something constructive. He threw himself into the role with an intensity that worried Bruce at times. He was more violent than Dick had been, more willing to hurt criminals rather than simply stop them. But he was effective. He made a difference. For a few brief years, Jason Todd had been something like happy. Then came the discovery that changed everything. His mother was alive, his real mother, not Catherine Todd, the woman who had raised him and died of an overdose, but his biological mother, a woman who had given him up at birth and vanished from his life before it truly began. The records were fragmentary, the trail cold, but Jason was nothing if not determined. He traced the leads across continents, following whispers and documents, and the desperate need to understand where he came from. The search led him to Africa, to a humanitarian mission in Ethiopia, to a woman named Sheila Haywood, who looked at him with his father's eyes and confirmed with trembling voice that yes, she was his mother. Yes, she'd given him up. Yes, she had regretted it every day since. What she did not tell him, what she could not bring herself to confess, was that she was in trouble, that her medical credentials were forged, that she'd been embezzling supplies from the humanitarian mission and selling them to the highest bidder, that the highest bidder in this case was the Joker, who was in the region conducting an arms deal with local warlords and who now had leverage over her that she could not escape. When the Joker learned that Robin was in the area, he saw an opportunity too perfect to pass up. And when he discovered that the boy's own mother was already in his pocket, the opportunity became irresistible. Sheila Haywood betrayed her son. She led him into the warehouse. She told him she needed his help, that there were criminals threatening her, that she was scared and alone and desperate for the protection only he could provide. And Jason, trusting her because she was his mother, because he wanted so badly to believe that he had finally found the family he had always craved, walked into the trap without suspicion. The Joker was waiting, the door locked, behind them, and Sheila stood frozen, unable to meet her son's eyes as the beating began. Now Jason lies on the concrete, and the bomb ticks, and his mother who betrayed him, who sold him out for her own survival, is locked in the warehouse with him. The Joker did not discriminate in his cruelty. Sheila had served her purpose, and now she was a loose end. She would die alongside the boy she had condemned. She crawls toward him. Her face is wet with tears, her hands shaking as she reaches for his broken body. "Jason," she whispers. "Jason, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never meant." He cannot respond, does not have the strength. But some part of him understands, even through the haze of pain and approaching death. She is afraid. She made a terrible choice out of fear, and now she's going to die for it, and in this final moment she's trying to be the mother she never was. Jason Todd manages, with the last reserves of his strength, to turn his body toward her, to shield her with what remains of himself. The bomb detonates. Miles away, the Batmobile screams through the desert night, its engine pushed beyond safe limits, its driver pushing himself beyond human endurance. Bruce Wayne knows something is wrong. The tracker in Jason's costume went silent hours ago. The contingency protocols have been activated. Every instinct honed by decades of crime fighting is screaming that he is running out of time. He sees the explosion before he reaches the warehouse, a fireball rising into the African sky, orange and yellow against the black, beautiful in the terrible way that destruction can sometimes be beautiful. He does not slow down, he drives faster, the Batmobile's tires throwing up clouds of dust, his heart hammering against his ribs with a force that threatens to crack them. The warehouse is rubble when he arrives. Bruce leaps from the vehicle before it fully stops, cape billowing behind him as he races toward the wreckage. His hands are already moving, pulling aside chunks of concrete and twisted metal, searching for any sign of life beneath the destruction. His cowl's sensors scan for heat signatures, for movement, for anything that might suggest survival. He finds Jason Todd at the center of the blast zone. The boy's body is broken beyond recognition. Burns cover what the crowbar had not already destroyed. His costume, the bright reds and yellows that had once symbolized hope and partnership, is charred and bloodied, barely clinging to the ruined flesh beneath. His eyes are closed. His chest does not rise. Bruce gathers the body into his arms. He has held dying people before. He has held dead people. The Batman's career is measured in tragedies, in lives lost despite his best efforts, in the unavoidable mathematics of a war that cannot be won completely. But this is different. This is Jason, his Robin, his son in every way that matters. The sound that escapes Bruce Wayne's throat is not human. It is something primal, something that comes from a place beyond language and reason. It is the sound of a heart being torn from a chest and crushed between uncaring fingers. It is the sound of a man who has lost everything once before and swore he would never lose anything again. He failed. He arrived too late. And the Joker is still out there, laughing. What followed the death of Jason Todd would reshape the Batman forever. The Dark Knight became darker, more brutal, more obsessive, more willing to push the boundaries of his famous code. The costume in the Batcave, preserved in a glass case with the inscription "A Good Soldier," served as a constant reminder of the cost of his crusade. Every time Bruce looked at it, he saw his own failure reflected back. Every time he encountered the Joker afterward, he felt the ghost of that night in Ethiopia pressing against the inside of his skull. The Joker, meanwhile, had achieved something unprecedented. He had struck at Batman in the most personal way possible, not by threatening Gotham, not by endangering innocence, but by murdering someone the Dark Knight loved. And he had done it with full awareness of what it would mean, with deliberate intent to cause maximum psychological damage to his eternal adversary. The aftermath was complicated by international politics. The Joker had been conducting his arms deal under the protection of a rogue nation, one that saw value in having a weapon like him at their disposal. When Batman tracked him down, ready to finally end their conflict permanently, he discovered that the Clown Prince of Crime had been appointed as that nation's ambassador to the United Nations. Diplomatic immunity, untouchable by any legal means, protected by international law even as he stood grinning over the grave of a murdered child. Bruce Wayne stood in that office facing the Joker across a desk, knowing that he could end it. One moment of violence, one abandonment of the principle that had defined his entire career. The Joker was defenseless, separated from his henchwomen and goons, and Batman was fully capable of snapping his neck before anyone could intervene. The Joker saw it in his eyes, saw how close the Batman was to breaking. And he smiled, that terrible, knowing smile, because either outcome was a victory. Either Batman would kill him and prove that the code was meaningless, that anyone could be pushed past their limits, that the Joker's philosophy of one bad day was correct, or Batman would restrain himself, would let the murder of his son walk away untouched, and prove that the code was a weakness, a vulnerability that could be exploited indefinitely. Batman did not kill him. The decision cost more than anyone would ever know. It was not mercy. It was not forgiveness. It was a refusal to give the Joker what he wanted, even when giving it would have felt like justice. Bruce Wayne walked away from that office with his code intact and his soul in tatters, knowing that Jason's death would remain unavenged, knowing that the Joker would continue to kill and destroy and laugh, knowing that the game would go on because he could not bring himself to end it. The diplomatic immunity did not last. International incidents have a way of resolving themselves, and eventually the Joker was stripped of his protection and returned to Arkham Asylum, where he continued his endless cycle of imprisonment and escape. But the damage was done. The relationship between Batman and his greatest enemy had been transformed by the death of Jason Todd, elevated to a level of personal hatred that transcended their philosophical differences. Every subsequent encounter carried the weight of that warehouse. Every exchange of blows was shadowed by the memory of the crowbar. The Joker knew what he had done, knew what it meant to the Batman, and he used that knowledge as another weapon in his arsenal. He would make references to Jason during their fights, would crack jokes about dead, sidekicks, would ask Bruce if he had taken on any new children lately, and whether he had learned to keep better track of them. The cruelty was deliberate and calculated. The Joker understood that the psychological wound would never fully heal, and he picked at it constantly, preventing the scar tissue from forming. He wanted Batman to remember, wanted him to feel the pain fresh with every encounter, wanted to demonstrate that even the strongest mind could be broken if you just kept applying pressure to the right points. Years later, Jason Todd would return. The mechanism of his resurrection, involving the reality-altering effects of a cosmic crisis and the restorative properties of a Lazarus pit, matters less than the fact of it. Jason came back, changed by death, changed by the experience of being murdered and abandoned. He came back angry. He came back as the Red Hood, adopting the identity of the Joker's former persona, armed with guns and a willingness to kill that his mentor had never permitted. And when Jason finally confronted the Joker, finally stood face to face with the man who had beaten him to death with a crowbar, the conversation that followed cut to the heart of everything. "Ignoring what he's done in the past," Jason said to Batman, holding a gun to the Joker's head, "blindly, stupidly disregarding the entire graveyards he's filled, the thousands who have suffered, the friends he's crippled. I thought killing me, that I'd be the last person you'd ever let him hurt. If it had been you that he beat to a bloody pulp, if he had taken you from this world, I would have done nothing but search the planet for this pathetic pile of evil, death-worshipping garbage and sent him off to hell." Batman's response was quiet, pained, honest in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. "You don't understand. I don't think you've ever understood." "What?" Jason demanded. "What? Your moral code just won't allow for that. It's too hard to cross that line. No. God almighty, no. It'd be too damned easy. All I've ever wanted to do is kill him. A day doesn't go by that I don't think about subjecting him to every horrendous torture he's dealt out to others and then end him. Then why? Why on God's earth is he still alive? Because if I allow myself to go down into that place, I'll never come back." The Joker, caught between them, laughed. Because of course he laughed. The answer was everything he had ever wanted to hear. The admission that the Batman's restraint was not strength but fear, that the code was not principle but survival mechanism, that beneath the cape and the cowl was a man holding himself together by the thinnest of threads, one bad day away from becoming exactly what the Joker had always claimed he was. Jason Todd did not kill the Joker that night. The confrontation ended in violence and escape, and the continuation of patterns that had defined all of them for decades. But the ghost of that warehouse in Ethiopia remains, a wound that will never fully heal, a death that can never truly be avenged, a failure that the Batman carries with him into every dark night. The crowbar rises, the crowbar falls, and somewhere in the darkness a boy screams for a father who arrives too late. Return now to the doorway. Return to that moment before the world shattered, when Barbara Gordon's hand was reaching for the handle, when the coffee was still warm on the kitchen table, when the future still held the possibility of happiness. We have seen what happened next through the fog of shock and trauma. Now we see it clearly. Now we understand the full weight of what the Joker intended and what he achieved. The plan had been forming for weeks, perhaps longer. Time moves strangely for the Joker, and what seems like spontaneous madness is often the product of meticulous preparation. He had selected his targets, with the care of a surgeon choosing where to make the first incision. Not Batman, not directly. The Dark Knight had proven resistant to frontal assault, had demonstrated time and again that physical violence only hardened his resolve. No, this attack would be surgical, psychological. An experiment designed to test a hypothesis that the Joker had long cherished. Anyone can be driven insane. Anyone can be broken. All it takes is one bad day. Commissioner James Gordon was the perfect subject. A man of unwavering principle in a city that devoured principled men. A beacon of integrity in the most corrupt police department in America. The Batman's closest ally in law enforcement, his connection to the legitimate world, his proof that working within the system could produce results. If Gordon could be broken, if the Joker could reduce this paragon of virtue to a gibbering wreck, then the argument would be won. Then Batman would have to acknowledge that his faith in humanity was misplaced, that the thin line between civilization and savagery was exactly that, thin, fragile, ready to snap at. The slightest pressure. But how to apply that pressure? Gordon had faced horrors before, had buried fellow officers, had seen the worst Gotham had to offer and emerged with his principles intact. A conventional assault would not suffice. The Joker needed something more personal, something that would strike at the core of the man, at the relationships and responsibilities that gave his life meaning. He needed Barbara. The Hawaiian shirt was a deliberate choice. Everything about the Joker is deliberate, especially the things that seem random. The garish pattern, the casual vacation wear aesthetic, the incongruity of such cheerful attire on such a nightmarish figure. It was a statement, a joke in itself. The monster at your door might be wearing anything, might look like anything. The threat does not announce itself with dark colours and ominous music. It arrives in paradise prints and a smile, and by the time you recognise it for what it is, the trigger has already been pulled. Barbara opened the door. The Joker raised the gun. The shot was not intended to kill. This is important. The Joker is many things: murderer, terrorist, agent of chaos, but he is never sloppy. When he wants someone dead, they die. When he wants them alive, they live. The bullet that tore through Barbara Gordon's abdomen was precisely calibrated to achieve a specific effect. Maximum damage to the spine, guaranteed paralysis, a wound that would transform the victim without eliminating her, that would leave her conscious and aware for what came next. She fell backward through the coffee table, and the Joker stepped over the threshold into her life. What followed was documented in the photographs he took. Click after click of the Polaroid camera, each flash freezing another moment of violation. He did not simply shoot her and leave. That would have been mercy, and the Joker had no mercy to give. He lingered. He posed her broken body in configurations designed to maximize humiliation. He stripped away her clothes, her dignity, her identity as the capable young woman who had fought alongside the Batman as Batgirl. He reduced her to meat and vulnerability and proof of his thesis. The photographs were not for publication. They were not trophies to be hoarded. They had a specific purpose, a role to play in the larger experiment. Commissioner Gordon would see them, would be forced to look at image after image of his daughter's destruction, would understand, in visceral and undeniable terms, exactly what the Joker was capable of, and exactly how little the rules of civilization mattered when chaos decided to assert itself. Gordon's capture was almost anticlimactic after the horror of Barbara's shooting. The commissioner fought. Of course he fought. This was Jim Gordon, the last honest cop in a city of crooked badges. But he was an aging man facing multiple assailants, already stunned by the violence inflicted on his daughter. They beat him until he stopped struggling. They stripped him of his clothes, his badge, his weapon. They loaded him into a vehicle that smelled of sawdust and old popcorn, and they drove him to the place the Joker had prepared. The amusement park had been abandoned for years, one of Gotham's many failed enterprises, a carnival that had promised family fun and delivered only bankruptcy and decay. The rides were rusted, the game booths collapsed, the funhouse mirrors cracked and clouded. It was a place where joy had come to die, and the Joker had claimed it as his theatre, his cathedral, the setting for the sermon he intended to deliver. Gordon was strapped into a modified ghost train car, naked and shivering in the October night. The track wound through the park's various attractions, each one reconfigured to display the photographs of Barbara's assault. Giant projections on stained canvas screens, blown-up prints plastered across the walls of the funhouse. Everywhere Gordon looked, his daughter's suffering confronted him. The Joker's voice crackled through ancient speakers, providing narration that was part lecture and part lullaby. "You know, I've been thinking lately about what it is that separates us from the animals, the voice mused as Gordon's car lurched past another image of Barbara's bleeding form. The animals don't worry about meaning. They eat, they sleep, they reproduce, they die. Simple, clean. No existential crises for the common field mouse, am I right? The car turned a corner. More photographs. Barbara's face contorted in agony, her hands reaching toward the camera in desperate supplication. But we humans, we just can't leave well enough alone. We need reasons, explanations. We need to believe that the universe makes sense, that good is rewarded and evil is punished, that our suffering has some kind of purpose. And when the universe fails to cooperate, when bad things happen to good people, when the innocent are destroyed for no reason whatsoever, we go a little crazy. We make up stories, gods and karma and cosmic justice, anything to avoid facing the truth. The car descended into what had once been the tunnel of love. The water was stagnant now, thick with algae and debris, and the air smelled of rot and decay. Screens flickered on either side, displaying the photographs in rapid sequence, a slideshow of horror that Gordon could not escape. The truth, Jimmy, is that there is no meaning, there is no purpose. There is no God watching over us and keeping score. There is only chaos. Beautiful, liberating chaos. And once you accept that, once you truly understand it down in your bones, you realize that nothing matters. None of this matters. Your daughter's pain doesn't matter. Your principles don't matter. You don't matter. The car emerged from the tunnel into an open plaza, where a stage had been constructed from salvaged carnival materials. The Joker stood at its center, resplendent in a ringmaster's outfit, top hat, red tailcoat, a cane that concealed a blade. Around him, his freak show performers capered and posed, men and women recruited from the margins of society, dressed in costumes that mocked normalcy, their faces painted in imitations of his own rictus grin. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Joker announced, his voice shifting into the cadence of a carnival barker, "welcome to the greatest show on earth. Tonight we present for your entertainment and edification the amazing, the incredible, the ever so slightly unhinged Commissioner James Gordon." The car stopped at the foot of the stage. Hands grabbed Gordon, hauling him up the steps, displaying his naked, beaten form to the assembled freaks. Look at him, folks, Gotham's finest, the incorruptible cop in the corruptible city, the man who thinks that rules and laws and badges mean something, the man who believes, who genuinely, adorably believes, that the system works. The Joker circled Gordon like a shark scenting blood. His cane tapped against the stage floor in a rhythm that might have been music. But here's the thing, Jimmy. The system doesn't work. It never worked. It's a collective delusion, a shared hallucination that lets you sleep at night while the world burns outside your window. And tonight, I'm going to cure you of that delusion. I'm going to show you what happens when the system breaks down, when the rules stop mattering, when you realize that the only difference between you and me is that I've seen the joke and you haven't. He leaned close, his face inches from Gordon's, his breath hot and sour. But don't worry, by the time we're done here, you'll be laughing too. The torture that followed was psychological as much as physical. The Joker's performers manhandled Gordon through a gauntlet of degradations, each one designed to strip away another layer of his identity. They dressed him in bondage gear that mocked his authority. They paraded him past the photographs of his daughter, forcing him to look, to see, to absorb the full weight of what had been done. They sang to him, a jaunty tune the Joker had composed for the occasion, its cheerful melody a grotesque counterpoint to its nihilistic lyrics. When the world is full of care and every headline screams despair, when all is rape and pillage and you're scrambling for your next meal, remember, life's a treat, so smile, you'll be happy for a while. Things are bound to get much worse, so learn to laugh at every hearse, and every time you're feeling cursed, just think what the first worst verse did. The song went on, verse after verse, a manifesto of madness set to music. Gordon listened. He had no choice but to listen, and somewhere in the endless parade of horrors, something in him began to crack. This was the moment the Joker had been waiting for, the moment when the incorruptible man showed the first signs of corruption, the moment when principle began to buckle under pressure and the facade of civilization started to crumble. But James Gordon was not just any man. He was the commissioner of Gotham City Police. He had faced horrors that would have broken lesser souls. He had buried friends and colleagues, had held dying officers in his arms, had seen the worst humanity had to offer, and still found reasons to believe in justice. The crack was there, yes, the trauma was real. But somewhere beneath the pain and the degradation, something else remained. Something unbreakable. He did not laugh. The Joker's experiment was failing. Gordon should have snapped by now, should have embraced the chaos, joined the laughter, proven that the veneer of civilization was as thin and fragile as the Joker believed. Instead, the old man hung in his restraints, silent and bloody, refusing to give his tormentor the satisfaction of watching him break. And then the Batman arrived. The Dark Knight descended upon the amusement park like judgment itself. The freak show performers scattered before him, their painted faces twisted in terror, their carnival courage evaporating in the face of genuine menace. The Joker watched him come with an expression that might have been anticipation, might have been relief, might have been something too complicated to name. Their confrontation in the funhouse was inevitable. The mirrors reflected infinite versions of them both. Batman fractured into a kaleidoscope of shadows. The Joker multiplied into an army of grinning horrors. They circled each other through the maze of glass and illusion, predator and prey indistinguishable. The philosophical argument they had been conducting for years finally reaching its climax. "Hello, Bats," the Joker said, his voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space. "I've been expecting you. In fact, I've been expecting you all night. Took you long enough." "Barbara is in the hospital," Batman growled. "She may never walk again." "Yes, tragic, isn't it? But necessary. You see, I've been conducting a little experiment, testing a hypothesis. The Commissioner was my subject, and his daughter was, well, let's call her the catalyst, the thing that would push him over the edge, the bad day that would prove my point. And what point is that?" The Joker spread his arms wide, his coat billowing around him like wings. "That we're all the same deep down. That anyone, Bats, even your precious Commissioner, even you, is just one bad day away from becoming exactly like me. The only difference between sanity and madness is luck, a roll of the dice, a random catastrophe that strips away the illusion and shows us what we really are." Batman moved closer, his fists clenched, every line of his body radiating barely contained violence. Gordon didn't break. For just a moment something flickered across the Joker's face. Surprise? Disappointment? It was gone too quickly to identify. "Didn't he? Are you sure? Because I think I saw cracks, Bats. I think I got closer than anyone ever has. And next time, because there's always a next time with us, isn't there? I'll get a little closer still. Chip, 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 until there's nothing left but rubble. There won't be a next time. Oh, but there will. There always is. That's the beauty of it. That's the joke." The Joker's voice dropped to something almost intimate. "We're both trapped, you and I, locked in this dance forever. You won't kill me because of your precious code. I won't kill you because, well, because what would be the point? Who else would I play with? Who else would appreciate the artistry?" The fight that followed was brutal and short. Batman's fists connected with unerring accuracy, driving the Joker through mirrors that shattered around them like frozen waterfalls. The Clown Prince of Crime offered token resistance, but his heart was not in it. He was tired. The night's entertainment had drained him in ways that had nothing to do with physical exertion. When it was over, the Joker lay on the ground amid the broken glass, blood trickling from his split lip. His, makeup smeared and ruined. Batman stood over him, breathing hard, every muscle tensed with the effort of not finishing what they both knew he could finish. "Do you want to know something, Bats?" the Joker asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something I've never told anyone?" Batman did not respond, did not move, simply waited. "I remember some days more clearly than others. The past, I mean. Before all this." He gestured vaguely at his own face, at the white skin and green hair and permanent smile. "Some days I remember being a chemical engineer at Ace. Some days I remember being a lab assistant. And some days I remember being a comedian." He laughed, but there was no humour in it. Only exhaustion, and something that might, in another man, have been grief. A comedian, can you imagine? Standing on stage every night begging people to laugh, and they never did, not once. And I had a wife, Jeannie, beautiful Jeannie, who believed in me when no one else did, who told me I was going to make it, right up until the day she died. right up until the universe decided that my particular tragedy wasn't complete enough and took her away from me. The Joker's eyes met Batman's through the shattered mirrors. She was pregnant, you know. We were going to have a baby, and then the heater malfunctioned and there was a fire, and suddenly I didn't have anything left to lose. So when the mobsters told me I had to go through with the ace job anyway, I went, and you were there, and I fell. And when I came out the other side, he spread his hands, encompassing everything he had become. One bad day. That's all it takes. I'm proof. And sooner or later you'll be proof too. Batman reached down and pulled the Joker to his feet. His grip was firm but not violent. Not the grip of a man about to dispense justice, but the grip of a man who had heard something he could not ignore. I've been thinking about us, you know, the Joker continued, swaying slightly in Batman's grasp. About where we're headed. And I think we're destined to do this forever. You'll keep trying to save everyone, and I'll keep showing you that you can't. You'll keep refusing to kill me, and I'll keep giving you reasons to. And one day, maybe years from now, maybe decades, one of us will finally push the other too far, and then it'll be over, one way or another. He paused, and something almost like sincerity entered his voice. But until then, we could try something different. We could actually talk. We could try to understand each other. I know you've been through trauma, Bats. I know something happened to you that pushed you over your own edge. We're not so different, you and I. We both responded to our worst day by putting on a costume and trying to reshape the world. The words hung in the air between them, an offer, a possibility. A moment of genuine connection between two broken men who had chosen opposite paths through the same darkness. Batman was silent for a long moment. Then, no. The Joker's face fell. Then he laughed. A real laugh this time, genuine and unforced. No? Just no? No explanation, no counter-argument, no. Well, the Joker shrugged. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. But I had to try, didn't I? For the sake of thoroughness, if nothing else. And then, impossibly, he told a joke. See, there were these two guys in a lunatic asylum, and one night they decide they don't like living in an asylum anymore. They decide they're going to escape, so they get up onto the roof, and there, just across this narrow gap, they see the rooftops of the town, stretching away in the moonlight, stretching away to freedom. The Joker's voice was soft now, almost hypnotic. Now the first guy, he jumps right across with no problem, but his friend daredn't make the leap. You see, he's afraid of falling. So then, the first guy has an idea. He says, "Hey, I have my flashlight with me. I'll shine it across the gap between the buildings. You can walk along the beam and join me." But the second guy just shakes his head. He says, "What do you think I am? Crazy? You'd turn it off when I was halfway across." The joke ended. The Joker looked up at Batman, waiting, and Batman laughed. It was a small sound at first, a huff of breath that might have been mistaken for exhaustion. But then it grew. It became genuine laughter, spilling out of the dark night in waves he could not control. And the Joker laughed too. Both of them stood in the wreckage of the funhouse, surrounded by broken mirrors and broken lives, and they laughed together at the absurdity of everything. The sound carried across the ruined amusement park, where Commissioner Gordon sat wrapped in a shock blanket, his eyes vacant but his mind somehow impossibly intact. "I want him brought in by the book," Gordon said to the officers who had arrived with the ambulance. His voice was hoarse, ravaged by the night's horrors, but unwavering. "By the book. We have to show him that our way works." The laughter faded, the sirens wailed, and the Joker was led away to Arkham Asylum to begin another cycle of imprisonment and eventual escape. Barbara Gordon would never walk again. The bullet had destroyed her spine, stolen her future as Batgirl, ended the career she had built fighting alongside the Dark Knight. But she would not be destroyed. In the months that followed, she would reinvent herself as Oracle, the information broker, the hacker, the all-seeing eye that guided heroes through dangers they could not navigate alone. She would prove that the Joker's cruelty could not define her, that trauma could be transformed into something powerful, that the worst day of her life was not the end of her story but a brutal pivot toward a different kind of greatness. The Killing Joke, as the night came to be known, resolved nothing. The Joker's experiment had failed. Gordon had not broken, but the cost of that failure was measured in shattered bodies and permanent scars. The philosophical question remained unanswered. suspended in the ambiguity of that shared laughter between the bat and the clown. Were they really so different? Was anyone truly immune to the one bad day? The debate continues in the shadows of Gotham, where the lights of Arkham Asylum glow against the night sky and the laughter never quite stops. Imagine waking up in a world where the sky's the wrong colour. Not dramatically wrong, not red or green or some alien hue that would immediately signal catastrophe. Just off. A shade of blue that sits incorrectly in your visual cortex, that triggers some primitive alarm in the back of your brain, even though you cannot articulate why. Now imagine that feeling extending to everything else. The buildings are slightly crooked. The faces of strangers are slightly distorted. The laws of physics work, mostly, but occasionally forget themselves in small ways that make you question your sanity. Gravity, hiccups. Reflections lag behind movements. Shadows fall in directions that have nothing to do with light sources. This is what it felt like to exist in the world the Joker created when he became a god. The story begins with Mr. Mjezbdulk, a being from the fifth dimension whose very existence defies human comprehension. Mjezbdulk is not evil in any conventional sense. He is mischievous, certainly. Annoying, undoubtedly. His periodic visits to the third dimension typically involve reality-bending pranks that torment Superman until the Man of Steel tricks him into saying his name backward, banishing him back to his home dimension. He possesses power that makes the combined might of Earth's heroes look like children playing with toys. He can reshape reality with a thought, rewrite the fundamental constants of the universe, create and destroy galaxies on a whim, and somehow, impossibly, the Joker stole that power from him. The exact mechanism of the theft remains unclear. Fifth, dimensional physics do not translate well into three-dimensional understanding. What is known is that Mjezbdulk, in one of his periodic visits to torment Superman, made the catastrophic mistake of engaging with the Joker. Perhaps he was curious about the clown's famous madness. Perhaps he underestimated a being he considered infinitely beneath him. Perhaps in some cosmic sense the Joker's chaos was simply more fundamental than Mjezbdulk's order, and when the two forces collided, chaos won. The result was a transfer of power that should have been impossible. Mjezbdulk found himself stripped of 99% of his reality-warping abilities, reduced to a fraction of his former self. And the Joker found himself holding the keys to existence itself. He did not hesitate. Reality shattered and reformed in an instant. The world that had existed, the world of heroes and villains, of struggles and triumphs, of the endless dance between order and chaos, was erased like a drawing on a chalkboard. In its place, the Joker built something new, something that reflected his deepest beliefs, his darkest desires, his fundamental understanding of how the universe should operate. He called it Joker World. And it was hell wearing a smile. The geography of this new reality followed dream logic rather than physical law. Gotham City sprawled across the entire planet, its Gothic architecture twisting into configurations that would have driven Escher to madness. Streets looped back on themselves. Buildings grew from the ground like tumours, their windows eyes that watched everything, their doors mouths that occasionally bit. The sky churned with colours that had no names, and the sun, when it appeared, wore the Joker's face grinning down on a population that had forgotten any other way of existing. The people of Joker World were not killed. That would have been too simple, too merciful for a god who understood that death was merely a transition, not a punishment. Instead, they were transformed, twisted into versions of themselves that served the Joker's aesthetic sensibilities. Businessmen became literal sharks in suits, their teeth filing themselves into points as they conducted transactions in blood. Politicians were fused with the podiums from which they spoke, their lies manifesting as physical deformities that grew more grotesque with each utterance. Children laughed constantly, not because they were happy, but because the alternative was a silence the Joker would not permit. Heroes fared worse. Superman was reimagined as a pathetic figure, a cosmic punching bag whose invulnerability served only to ensure he could experience infinite pain without the release of death. The Joker delighted in devising new torments for the Man of Steel, creative applications of power that exploited every vulnerability, every fear, every aspect of the hero's psychology that could be weaponized against him. Wonder Woman was reduced to a parody of herself, her strength and wisdom stripped away, her divine heritage mocked through endless humiliations. The Green Lantern's ring was reprogrammed to generate constructs of his deepest fears. The Flash was frozen in a single moment, conscious but unable to move, experiencing the horror of eternal stillness. But none of them suffered like Batman. The Dark Knight occupied a special place in the Joker's new reality. He was not transformed, he was not diminished. He remained exactly who he had always been. The brilliant detective, the peak human warrior, the symbol of order and justice in a chaotic universe. This was deliberate. The Joker wanted Batman to understand what was happening, wanted him to see clearly and completely the world that had been built around him, wanted him to know that everything he had fought for, everything he believed in, had been rendered meaningless by a single act of cosmic theft. And then, every night, the Joker killed him. The murders were elaborate, theatrical, infinitely varied. One night, Batman was torn apart by a mob of Jokerized citizens, their laughter echoing as they pulled him limb from limb. Another night, he was dropped into an endless pit filled with his worst fears made manifest. Not the abstract fears of psychology, but the specific personal terrors that haunted Bruce Wayne's dreams. Another night, he was simply erased from existence, his atoms scattered across dimensions, his consciousness dispersed into the void between realities, and every morning he woke up again, restored, healed, ready for another day of watching the Joker's world spin in its mad orbit, followed by another night of creative destruction. The psychological toll was beyond calculation. Batman experienced death hundreds of times, thousands perhaps. The count became meaningless in a reality where time itself was a plaything. Each death was fully real, fully felt, the pain and terror undiminished by repetition, and each resurrection brought the knowledge that it would happen again and again, forever, unless something changed. The Joker watched these daily executions with the enthusiasm of a child opening birthday presents. He invented new methods of murder with genuine creative passion, treating each death as an artistic statement, a variation on themes he had been developing throughout his career. Sometimes he participated directly, his godlike form looming over the broken Batman as the final blow was struck. Sometimes he observed from a distance, critiquing his own work with the eye of a connoisseur. Always he laughed. Harley Quinn served as his consort in this twisted paradise. She had been elevated alongside him, granted power that made her previous abilities seem trivial, installed as the queen of a reality that catered to her beloved Mr. J's every whim. But even she began to sense that something was wrong. The Joker's obsession with Batman had always been intense, but now it consumed everything. He spent more time devising new torments for the Dark Knight than he did enjoying his godhood. He ignored the infinite possibilities of omnipotence in favour of this single, narrow fixation. "Puddin'," Harley ventured one day, watching him sketch out plans for yet another elaborate execution. "Don't you think maybe you could, I don't know, do something else for a change? You got the whole universe to play with. Why you're spending all your time on B-Man?" The Joker looked at her with eyes that held the infinite and found it boring. "Because he's the only thing that matters," he said. "Don't you understand? I could create galaxies. I could build civilizations and tear them down. I could make angels dance and demons weep. But none of it means anything without him. He's my audience, my counterpart, the only one who truly appreciates what I'm doing here." This was the revelation that would ultimately undo the Joker's godhood. Even with infinite power, even with reality itself bent to his will, he could not escape his fundamental nature. He was defined by his relationship with the Batman so completely, so inextricably, that omnipotence without the Dark Knight's opposition felt hollow. He could reshape the universe, but he could not reshape himself. The obsession was not a choice, it was his identity. Without it, he was nothing. Mzizptolk, diminished but not destroyed, saw the weakness and began to plan. The imp had retained just enough power to manipulate events at the margins, to plant seeds that might eventually grow into something useful. He whispered in the ears of the few beings who retained their true memories. Lois Lane, whose love for Superman burned through even the Joker's reality warping. Supergirl, whose Kryptonian physiology offered some resistance to the changes. And Superman himself, who clung to hope even in the deepest pit of despair. The resistance formed slowly, carefully. Moving in the shadows of a world where the shadows themselves might betray them, they understood that they could not defeat the Joker through force. His power was absolute, his awareness nearly omniscient. But power and awareness were not the same as wisdom, and the Joker's wisdom had always been selective. He understood chaos perfectly, but order not at all. He could destroy but rarely create, and his need for Batman, his inability to simply erase the Dark Knight from existence and be done with it, was a crack in the foundation of his godhood. The plan that eventually succeeded was elegant in its simplicity. They could not take the Joker's power from him directly, but they could trick him into giving it away. Mxyzptlk, appearing before the Joker as a broken and defeated servant, offered to show his new master how to truly use fifth-dimensional abilities. The lessons were real. Mxyzptlk held nothing back, but they were also a trap. Each new technique required the Joker to channel his power in specific ways, to open himself to specific vulnerabilities, and when the moment was right, when the Joker was fully extended into the fabric of reality, Mxyzptlk struck. The power flowed back to its original owner like water finding its level. The Joker screamed, not in pain, but in loss, in the sudden absence of godhood that left him feeling smaller than he had ever felt before. Reality shuddered, flickered, and began to reset. But there was a cost. Superman absorbed the bulk of the damage, his Kryptonian body serving as a buffer between the collapsing Joker world and the reality that was trying to reassert itself. He experienced every impossibility that had been created, every violation of natural law, every moment of suffering that the Joker's reign had inflicted. The strain nearly killed him, would have killed anyone else, any lesser being. He survived through sheer force of will, through the stubborn refusal to surrender that had always defined him. And Batman remembered everything, every death, every resurrection, every moment of agony and terror that the Joker had inflicted during his time as God. The memories were not erased when reality returned to normal. They remained, buried in Bruce Wayne's psyche like shrapnel too dangerous to remove. He had died thousands of times. He had felt his body destroyed in every conceivable way. And he had woken up again and again knowing that it would never end. The trauma expressed itself in subtle ways. A hesitation where there had been none before. A darkness in his eyes that even Alfred noticed and worried over. A tendency to push himself harder than ever, as if trying to prove that he was still himself, still the man he had been before a mad god had made him a plaything. The Joker had not broken him, had never been able to break him, even with infinite power, but he had left marks that would never fully heal. As for the Joker himself, he returned to Arkham Asylum with a strange new peace. He had tasted omnipotence and found it wanting. He had reshaped reality in his image and discovered that the image was empty without the one thing he could not control. Batman's defiance, his refusal to stay dead, to give up, to acknowledge the Joker's victory, had proven more powerful than godhood itself. The game would continue. It always continued. But now, both players understood something they had only suspected before. The Joker needed Batman to exist, not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a fundamental component of his identity. And Batman, though he would never admit it, perhaps not even to himself, found something essential in the opposition, a purpose, a definition, a reason to keep fighting in a world that often seemed beyond saving. Emperor Joker had ruled reality for what felt like eternity, and in the end he had proven only that his obsession was stronger than infinity itself. She was brilliant once, before the makeup, before the mallet, before the accent that dripped like poisoned honey, and the laugh that echoed his own. Dr. Harleen Frances Quinzel was a prodigy, summa cum laude from Gotham State University, top of her class at the psychiatric residency program, recruited straight out of training by Arkham Asylum itself. She had published papers on the psychology of obsession that were cited by researchers across the country. She had developed therapeutic techniques that showed genuine promise in treating the most damaged minds. She had a future, a career, a path forward that did not involve face paint and dynamite. Then she met him. The assignment came with warnings that Harleen dismissed as professional jealousy. Every psychiatrist at Arkham wanted the Joker on their patient roster. He was the ultimate challenge, the Mount Everest of criminal psychology, the case that would make or break a career. The senior staff had failed with him, one after another, their sessions producing nothing but cryptic remarks and manipulation tactics that left them questioning their own sanity. But Harleen was young and confident and certain that her fresh perspective would succeed where their outdated methods had failed. She prepared meticulously, reviewed every file, every transcript, every recording of previous sessions. She studied his crimes like sacred texts, searching for patterns in the chaos, meaning in the madness. She developed a therapeutic approach specifically tailored to his psychology, or what she believed his psychology to be, based on the incomplete picture the files provided. She walked into that first session armed with education and ambition, and the absolute certainty that she was different from all the rest. The Joker was waiting for her. He sat in his restraints with the casual ease of a man relaxing in his favourite chair, his posture communicating not imprisonment but choice, the suggestion that he remained confined only because confinement amused him. His eyes tracked her as she entered, cataloguing details with an intelligence that the popular image of the mad clown often obscured. The Joker was not merely insane. He was brilliant, dangerously, devastatingly brilliant. And he recognized immediately that this young doctor, with her careful notes and eager expression, was exactly what he had been waiting for. "Dr. Quinzel," he said, her name emerging from his lips like a secret being shared. "Harleen, if I may. It means little Harlequin, did you know that? The universe has such a delicious sense of humour sometimes." She should have been alarmed by the familiarity, should have recognized the manipulation beginning in that first moment. But she was focused on establishing rapport, on building the therapeutic relationship that would allow her to probe the mysteries of his psychology. She smiled and sat down and began the session that would slowly, inexorably destroy her. Over the weeks that followed, the Joker constructed a character specifically designed to appeal to Harleen Quinzel. He did his research, interrogating guards about her habits, manipulating other patients into gathering information, piecing together a portrait of her vulnerabilities with the patience of an artist preparing a canvas. He learned that she came from humble origins, that she had clawed her way up through a system stacked against her. He learned that beneath her professional confidence lurked deep insecurities about her worthiness, about whether she truly belonged among the educated elite or was merely a pretender waiting to be exposed. He learned that she craved connection, validation, the feeling of being truly seen and understood, and he gave her exactly what she craved. In their sessions, he presented himself not as a monster, but as a victim, a man who had been broken by a cruel world, whose madness was a response to trauma rather than an expression of evil. He spoke of his past, the failed comedian, the dead wife, the chemical transformation, with a vulnerability that seemed utterly genuine. He wept. He trembled. He reached through the bars of his cell toward her with hands that seemed desperate for human connection. "No one's ever listened to me before," he told her, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "Not really listened. The other doctors, they just wanted to fix me, to turn me back into whatever I was before. But you actually want to understand. You see me, Harleen. You see the man beneath the makeup." She documented everything in her notes, believing she was making breakthrough progress with the most dangerous patient in the asylum's history. She did not recognize that her notes were increasingly focused on his supposed vulnerabilities, his hidden depths, his potential for rehabilitation. She did not notice that her professional objectivity was eroding, replaced by something that felt like empathy, but was actually the early stages of obsession. The Joker pushed further. He confided in her, secrets that he claimed to have never shared with anyone. He told her about his childhood, his abuse, his desperate longing for someone who would accept him as he truly was. The stories were lies, of course, all of them, fabricated with the same care he brought to his most elaborate crimes, tailored specifically to exploit the psychological vulnerabilities he had identified in her. But Harleen believed them because she wanted to believe them, because the alternative was admitting that she had been played from the very beginning. "You know what I think, Doc," he said during one of their later sessions, his restraints having been loosened at her recommendation, his chair positioned closer to hers than protocol allowed. "I think you're the first person who's ever really understood me, the first person who sees past the Joker to the man underneath. And I think I think maybe I'm falling in love with you." The words should have been a red flag bright enough to burn through any remaining professional blindness. A patient expressing romantic feelings for their therapist was textbook transference, a phenomenon every first-year psychology student learned to recognize and address. But Harleen did not see transference. She saw truth. She saw a broken man finally opening himself to the healing power of genuine connection. She saw a reflection of her own feelings. The affair began shortly thereafter. Stolen moments in treatment rooms, whispered conversations through cell bars, a relationship that violated every ethical principle she had been trained to uphold. Harleen told herself that this was different, that their connection transcended the ordinary rules of doctor-patient relationships. She told herself that she was saving him, that her love was the key to his rehabilitation. She did not understand, could not understand, so thoroughly had he manipulated her perception, that she was not the saviour in this story. She was the victim. The transformation happened gradually, then all at once. Harleen began to dress differently, speak differently, carry herself with a theatrical flair that she had never possessed before. She started making excuses for the Joker's crimes, rationalizing his violence as the inevitable response to a society that had failed him. She helped him escape from Arkham, not once, but multiple times, risking everything she had worked for, burning every bridge to her former life. And when the consequences finally caught up with her, when she was stripped of her medical license and facing criminal charges of her own, he was waiting with open arms and a new identity already prepared. Harley Quinn emerged from the wreckage of Harleen Quinzel like a butterfly from a chrysalis, if butterflies were forged in psychological manipulation, and emerged with their capacity for independent thought severely compromised. The costume was a mockery of her former self, the Harlequin reference made literal, her professional dignity traded for grease paint and a jester's motley. Her intelligence remained, but it was now directed entirely towards serving the Joker's needs. Her ambition persisted, but it was focused solely on earning his approval. She loved him completely, loved him with a desperation that outsiders found incomprehensible and insiders recognized as the hallmark of abuse victims everywhere. She called him Mr. J and Puddin, and looked at him with an adoration that never wavered, no matter what he did to her, and what he did to her was monstrous. The physical abuse was almost constant, backhands across the face for minor infractions, kicks and punches for perceived failures. He threw her from windows, he pushed her into traffic, he locked her in rooms with his attack dogs and laughed at her screams. He shot at her, stabbed her, poisoned her, sometimes deliberately, sometimes on a whim, sometimes apparently just to see what would happen. The violence was so routine that Harley stopped recognizing it as abnormal, started treating her injuries as simply part of being in love with the Joker. That's just his way of showing affection, she would tell herself, icing a black eye or bandaging a knife wound. He's got issues, you know, but deep down he really does love me. The psychological abuse was worse. The Joker understood exactly how to hurt Harley in ways that left no visible marks. He would shower her with attention and affection for days, making her feel like the most important person in the world, and then withdraw completely, ignoring her existence, treating her as furniture, acting as though she had simply ceased to exist. The cycle would repeat endlessly, idealization followed by devaluation, warmth followed by ice, love followed by contempt. Harley never knew which version of him she would encounter, and the uncertainty kept her in a constant state of anxious hypervigilance. He mocked her intelligence, dismissed her contributions, took credit for her ideas. He flirted with other women in front of her, sometimes more than flirted, rubbing her face in his faithlessness while expecting absolute loyalty in return. He told her she was nothing without him, that no one else would ever want her, that the only value she had was as an extension of himself. And she believed him, because he had spent months carefully dismantling her self-esteem before revealing his true nature. The incident known as Mad Love illustrated their dynamic with terrible clarity. Harley, desperate to prove her worth to the Joker, devised an elaborate trap for the Batman, a scheme that actually worked, that actually caught the Dark Knight in an inescapable death trap. She had done what the Joker had never managed to do. She had defeated his nemesis. She presented her victory to Mr. J like a cat bringing a dead bird to its owner, expecting praise, expecting gratitude, expecting finally to receive the recognition she had been craving. The Joker flew into a rage. He did not want Batman dead. Not really. Not like this. The Dark Knight was his obsession, his counterpart, the essential element that gave his existence meaning. And this foolish girl, this lovesick moron he kept around for amusement, had almost ruined everything. He beat her savagely, screaming about how she had overstepped, how she had interfered, how she could never understand the sacred game he and Batman played. Then he threw her from a window, a fall that should have killed her, would have killed her if she had not been lucky enough to land in a way that merely shattered bones rather than ending her life. She forgave him within the week, made excuses for his behaviour, convinced herself that she had been wrong to act without his permission, that his anger was justified, that she would do better next time. The cycle continued. It took years, years of abuse, years of manipulation, years of watching the Joker's attention wander to new obsessions while treating her as an afterthought, for Harley to begin questioning the relationship. The catalyst was not any single act of cruelty, but an accumulation of small realizations that gradually penetrated the psychological fortress the Joker had built around her mind. She started noticing the pattern of abuse and reconciliation, started remembering who she had been before him, the brilliant doctor with the promising career, started listening to the voice in the back of her head that whispered, with increasing urgency, that this was not love. Poison Ivy found her at her lowest point. Pamela Isley, the eco-terrorist known as Poison Ivy, had her own complicated history with the Joker, and none of it was positive. She recognized immediately what Harley was going through, understood the psychological mechanisms that kept abuse victims trapped in toxic relationships, and she offered something the Joker never had: genuine friendship without conditions or expectations. The relationship between Harley and Ivy began as rehabilitation, and evolved into something deeper. Ivy helped Harley recognize the abuse for what it was, provided a safe space where she could process her trauma, offered an alternative vision of what relationships could be. She did not try to replace the Joker in Harley's heart, understood that healing from that kind of attachment was a process that could not be rushed. She simply existed as proof that another way of living was possible. Harley's break from the Joker was not clean. It never is in these situations. She left him and returned multiple times, each departure followed by a period of freedom, followed by a relapse into old patterns. The Joker alternated between trying to win her back and trying to destroy her, his response to her independence as unpredictable as everything else about him. Sometimes he sent flowers and promises to change. Sometimes he sent assassins. But eventually, gradually, painfully, with setbacks and relapses and moments of despair, Harley Quinn emerged as her own person. Not the doctor she had been, but not the victim she had become either. Something new, an anti-hero who used the skills the Joker had, taught her to pursue her own agenda, sometimes villainous and sometimes almost heroic. A woman who had survived the worst relationship imaginable and emerged with her capacity for joy, twisted though it might be, somehow intact. The Joker's reaction to her independence varied with his mood and his current psychological state. Sometimes he seemed genuinely hurt, as if surprised that the toy he had broken could reassemble itself without his permission. Sometimes he affected indifference, claiming that she had never mattered to him, that she was easily replaceable. Sometimes he raged, sending his goons after her, making her life as difficult as possible out of pure spite. But he never fully let go. Just as he could not exist without Batman, some part of him could not exist without Harley. Not because he loved her, but because she was proof of his power. He had taken a brilliant woman and unmade her, had reshaped her identity according to his will, had created something that existed only in relation to himself. Losing her felt like losing a limb, even if he had never valued the limb while it was attached. The love story of the Joker and Harley Quinn is not a romance. It is a case study in psychological abuse, a masterclass in manipulation, a tragedy wearing motley and grease paint. It demonstrates the Joker's capacity for cruelty even toward those who worship him, his inability to form genuine connections even when connection is offered freely. And it demonstrates something else, something that the Joker himself might not fully understand. He is incapable of love, not unwilling, incapable. The machinery that produces love in normal human beings is simply absent from his psychology, whether by birth or by the chemical transformation that created him. He can mimic love, can perform its rituals and speak its language. But the substance eludes him, and when he reaches for it, he finds only manipulation and control and the hollow satisfaction of watching others dance, to his tune. Harley Quinn escaped him. Not completely. You never completely escape someone who has reshaped your psychology, but enough. Enough to build a new life, enough to form new relationships based on something other than abuse, enough to become, improbably, something like a hero in her own right. The clown princess found her way out of the funhouse. The Joker remains inside, laughing at a joke only he can hear, surrounded by the echoes of everyone he has ever broken. The earthquake measured 7.6 on the Richter scale. It struck without warning on a spring evening when Gotham's citizens were going about their ordinary lives, commuting home from work, preparing dinner, watching television, existing in the comfortable illusion that the ground beneath them was stable and permanent. The first tremor was almost gentle, a subtle vibration that rattled windows and set hanging lamps swaying. Then came the second wave, and the third, and suddenly the earth itself was screaming. Buildings that had stood for a century collapsed in seconds. Streets split open like wounds, swallowing cars and pedestrians into chasms that seemed to descend into hell itself. The bridges connecting Gotham to the mainland twisted and fell, their steel cables snapping with sounds like gunshots, their concrete spans tumbling into the churning waters below. Gas mains ruptured and ignited, painting the night sky with pillars of fire that could be seen for miles, and through it all, the screaming continued, human voices joining the geological roar in a chorus of terror and despair. When the shaking finally stopped, Gotham City was unrecognizable. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble. The death toll climbed into the thousands, then the tens of thousands, with countless more missing beneath the debris. The infrastructure that kept a modern city functioning, water, electricity, communications, transportation, had been virtually annihilated, and as the survivors emerged from the wreckage, blinking in the dust-choked air, they discovered that their nightmare was only beginning. The federal government declared Gotham a disaster zone. Aid flowed in initially, rescue workers, medical supplies, emergency funding. But as the scale of the destruction became clear, as the cost of rebuilding was calculated and found to be astronomical, the political calculus shifted. Gotham had always been problematic, a city of corruption and crime, a drain on federal resources, a symbol of urban decay that embarrassed the nation. The earthquake offered an opportunity to cut losses, to wash hands of the whole mess, to declare the city unsalvageable and move on. The bridges were demolished rather than repaired. The tunnels were sealed. A military cordon was established around the island, preventing anyone from entering or leaving. And the citizens who remained, those too poor or too stubborn or too damaged to evacuate before the borders closed, were left to fend, for themselves in the ruins of what had once been their home. No man's land had begun. The year that followed was a descent into a primal state that philosophers had long theorized about, but civilized humans had rarely witnessed. Without law enforcement, without government services, without the basic structures that maintained social order, Gotham reverted to something ancient and brutal. Territory became everything. The strong claimed what they could hold, the weak served or perished. Gangs formed around charismatic leaders, carving the ruined city into fiefdoms that warred constantly for resources and power. The villains of Gotham adapted with characteristic opportunism. Penguin established himself as a black market kingpin, his connections to the outside world making him invaluable to anyone seeking supplies that could not be scavenged from the rubble. Two-Face claimed the courthouse district, dispensing his own twisted version of justice to those who fell under his authority. Poison Ivy transformed Robinson Park into a green sanctuary, offering protection to refugees in exchange for service to her ecological agenda. Even the lesser criminals found their niches, building small empires from the chaos. But the Joker was notably absent. For months after the earthquake, there was no sign of the Clown Prince of Crime. No laughing gas attacks, no theatrical announcements, no bodies discovered with frozen smiles. The Joker had simply vanished, and his absence was somehow more unsettling than his presence would have been. Gotham's surviving citizens whispered about it in their makeshift shelters, wondering where he had gone, wondering what he was planning, wondering when the other shoe would finally drop. Batman noticed too. The Dark Knight had remained in no man's land despite the government's abandonment, working tirelessly to protect what remained of his city, to push back against the criminal elements that threatened to consume it entirely. He tracked the movements of every major villain, maintained intelligence networks even in the midst of civilizational collapse, prepared for threats before they fully materialized. But the Joker's location eluded him. The clown had gone to ground so completely that even the world's greatest detective could not find him. This was intentional. The Joker understood something that his fellow villains did not. The chaos of no man's land was too raw, too unstructured, too lacking in the essential element that made his crimes meaningful. There was no order to subvert, no civilization to mock, no pretense of normalcy to shatter. Committing atrocities in a landscape of atrocities was redundant, meaningless, boring. He waited, therefore, watched from the shadows as Gotham tore itself apart, as the other villains exhausted themselves in territorial disputes, as the population that remained grew desperate enough to be properly appreciative of what he would eventually offer. When he finally emerged, it was with an army. The Jokers, as they came to be called, were recruited from the most damaged survivors of the earthquake. The people who had lost everything and everyone. The people whose minds had cracked under the strain of watching their world destroyed. The people who were ready to embrace any philosophy that offered an alternative to the grinding despair of existence in the ruins. The Joker gave them purpose, identity, belonging. He gave them face paint and weapons and permission to indulge their darkest impulses. He gave them someone to follow in a world where following someone, anyone, felt like survival. They swept through no man's land like a plague, claiming territory not through the careful negotiations and strategic maneuvers that characterized the other villains, but through sheer, overwhelming violence. The Joker was not interested in sustainable empire building. He was interested in destruction for its own sake, in demonstrating that even in a world already broken, he could break it further. His Jokers attacked everyone indiscriminately. Other villain territories, civilian encampments, even the small pockets of order that Batman and his allies had managed to establish. The other criminals began to fear him in a way they had not before. In normal times, the Joker was dangerous but contained, his schemes elaborate but ultimately bounded by the structures of civilization he claimed to despise. In no man's land, those bounds had been removed. He was operating without restraint, without limits, without even the minimal predictability that had previously characterized his behavior. He had become pure chaos, and chaos in a lawless landscape was more terrifying than chaos in a functioning society. The horror reached its apex on Christmas Eve. Commissioner Gordon, who had remained in no man's land alongside Batman, who had organized the surviving police officers into a resistance force, who had never stopped believing that his city could be saved, received word that the Joker had taken hostages, not ordinary hostages, babies, infants from the makeshift orphanage that had been established in one of the few stable buildings remaining. The Joker had stolen them in the night, dozens of newborns and toddlers, the most innocent and vulnerable victims imaginable. The message was delivered through a surviving television broadcast, the Joker's face flickering on screens throughout the ruined city. "Season's greetings, Gotham," he announced with manic cheer. "I know times have been hard lately, what with the whole apocalypse situation, so I thought I'd spread some holiday joy. I've got a little present for everyone. Well, actually, about 30 little presents. Tiny, screaming, utterly helpless presents. And unless someone comes to collect them by midnight, I'm afraid they'll have to be returned to sender." He smiled into the camera, and the smile was worse than anything he had ever done before. "Commissioner Gordon, I know you're watching. Why don't you come pick up your Christmas gifts? I promise I'll be gentle." Gordon went. He went knowing it was a trap. Went knowing that the Joker was expecting him, had planned for him, had designed this entire scenario specifically to draw him in. But what choice did he have? The babies were real. Their danger was real. And James Gordon had never been the kind of man who could sacrifice innocence to protect himself, even when protection was clearly the rational choice. Sarah Essen went with him. Gordon's wife, his second wife, the woman who had stood beside him through the worst year of their lives, who had proven herself as dedicated to Gotham's survival as he was, refused to let him face the Joker alone. They had argued about it, briefly and intensely, but Sarah had made her decision and nothing Gordon said could change it. They approached the Joker's lair together, armed with weapons they knew would be inadequate, driven by a courage that bordered on madness. The Joker was waiting in what had once been a police precinct, now a charnel house decorated for the holidays. The babies were there, alive, crying, arranged in a grotesque parody of a nativity scene. His Jokers surrounded the building, cutting off any possibility of escape or reinforcement, and the Joker himself stood at the centre of the chaos, a Santa hat perched atop his green hair, his arms spread wide in welcome. "Jimmy, Sarah, so glad you could make it. I was starting to worry you'd miss the party." What followed was a nightmare in slow motion. Gordon was separated from his wife, pinned down by Jokers while the Joker advanced on Sarah with the leisurely pace of someone who had all the time in the world. She fought. Of course she fought. This was Sarah Essen, one of Gotham's finest. But she was outnumbered and outmaneuvered, and when she finally managed to break free and reach the babies, she found herself facing an impossible choice. The Joker held an infant in his arms, held it, carelessly, dangerously, as if it were a prop rather than a human life. And he offered Sarah a deal. "Here's the thing, detective. I'm going to throw this baby. You can try to catch it, or you can try to shoot me. But you can't do both. So what's it going to be? Your duty as a cop, or your instinct as a human being?" He threw the baby. Sarah dropped her weapon and caught the child, protecting it with her body, acting on an instinct that overrode every tactical consideration. And in that moment of vulnerability, that moment when her hands were full and her guard was down, the Joker produced a pistol and shot her in the head. She was dead before she hit the ground. Gordon's scream echoed through the ruins of the precinct, through the ruins of the city, through the ruins of his life. He broke free from the Jokers holding him, not through skill but through the pure animal strength of a man watching his wife murdered. He threw himself at the Joker, hands reaching for the throat of the monster who had taken everything from him. The Joker let him come, let Gordon's hands close around his neck, let the Commissioner squeeze with all the strength grief and rage could provide. And he laughed. A choked, strangled laugh that somehow made the sound more horrible, not less. "Do it!" he gasped. "Come on, Jimmy, do it! Prove me right. Prove that you're just like everyone else. One bad day, that's all it takes." Gordon squeezed harder. The Joker's face began to purple, his eyes bulging, his laughter fading into wet gurgles. Another few seconds and it would be over. The monster would be dead, and Sarah would be. Not avenged. Nothing could avenge this. But at least answered. At least acknowledged. Gordon released him. The Joker collapsed to the ground, gasping and coughing, his throat already bruising from the pressure. Gordon stood over him, shaking with the effort of restraint, tears streaming down his face. "No," Gordon said. "I won't give you that. I won't become what you want me to be." The Joker looked up at him with something that might have been disappointment, might have been respect, might have been both. "Well," he wheezed, "that's a shame. I really thought you had it in you." Batman arrived moments later, too late to save Sarah, in time to see Gordon standing over the Joker with murder in his eyes, and the decision not to commit it carved into every line of his body. The Dark Knight took the Joker into custody, such as custody meant in No Man's Land, and began the process of recovering the babies and securing the scene. But the damage was done. Sarah Essen was buried in Robinson Park, in the green sanctuary poison ivy had created from the earthquake's devastation. Gordon stood at her grave as the dirt was shoveled over the coffin, and something in him died alongside her. Not his principles, those remained, harder than ever, tempered by the fire of loss, but his hope. His belief that Gotham could be saved without cost, that good could triumph, without sacrifice. The Joker had won, in a way, had proven that he could inflict wounds that would never heal, could take things that could never be returned. Gordon would continue fighting for Gotham, would see the city eventually restored, the bridges rebuilt, the government's abandonment reversed. But he would do it as a man who had lost his wife to the laughter of a madman, and that loss would colour everything that came after. No Man's Land ended. Gotham returned to something like normalcy. The villains retreated to their usual haunts. The civilians began rebuilding. The structures of civilization reasserted themselves over the chaos. But the Joker had demonstrated something important during that year of lawlessness. Even in a world without rules, even in a landscape of pure chaos, he remained the most chaotic thing in it. The other villains had adapted to No Man's Land. had found ways to function within its brutal logic. The Joker had transcended it, had shown that his capacity for destruction operated on a level beyond mere anarchy. He was not chaos. He was the chaos that chaos feared. And somewhere in the rebuilt city, in the restored precinct where his wife had died, James Gordon lit a candle and remembered the invitation arrived on cream-coloured stationery, the paper thick and expensive, the handwriting elegant in a way that suggested old money and older secrets. It was addressed to Bruce Wayne, not Batman, and it promised something that should have been impossible: the complete destruction of the Dark Knight, orchestrated by forces that had been working toward this goal for longer than Bruce had been alive. The Black Glove was not a criminal organisation in any conventional sense. It was a club, an exclusive gathering of the world's wealthiest and most corrupt individuals, united by a shared philosophy of absolute moral bankruptcy. They believed that evil was the natural state of humanity, that goodness was merely weakness dressed in pretty clothes, and that proving this thesis was the highest form of entertainment. They wagered fortunes on the corruption of heroes, the destruction of ideals, the systematic dismantling of everything decent and hopeful in the world. And they had chosen Batman as their ultimate target. The man who led them called himself Dr. Hurt, though this was merely the latest in a series of identities stretching back centuries. He claimed to be Thomas Wayne, not Bruce's father, but an ancestor from generations past, a devil-worshipping physician who had discovered the secret of immortality through means too dark to name. Whether this claim was true, whether Dr. Hurt was genuinely an immortal evil, or simply a madman with delusions of grandeur, remained unclear. What was certain was his obsession with destroying the Wayne legacy, with proving that the family's reputation for philanthropy and heroism was built on foundations of corruption. The assault on Batman was psychological rather than physical. Dr. Hurt had done his research, had uncovered secrets about Bruce Wayne's past that even the Dark Knight himself had forgotten. He knew about the isolation experiments Bruce had undergone years earlier, sensory deprivation chambers designed to prepare him for the psychological warfare he might face as Batman. He knew about the backup personality Bruce had created during those experiments, a fail-safe identity called the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh, designed to take over if Bruce Wayne's primary psyche was ever compromised, and he knew about the Joker. The Black Glove's plan required chaos, genuine, uncontrollable chaos that would mask their surgical strikes against Batman's mind. They needed a distraction so overwhelming that even the world's greatest detective would be unable to see the real threat until it was too late. And there was only one source of chaos in Gotham reliable enough to serve this purpose. They approached the Joker with an offer of alliance. The meeting took place in one of Gotham's abandoned theatres, a grand space that had once hosted opera and ballet, and now hosted only rats and shadows. The Black Glove's representatives arrived in expensive suits, carrying briefcases full of money and promises. They explained their plan with the confidence of men who had never been refused, who assumed that everyone had a price and that finding it was merely a matter of negotiation. The Joker listened with apparent interest, nodded at appropriate moments, asked clarifying questions that suggested he was taking the proposal seriously. And when the presentation was complete, when the representatives sat back with satisfied smiles and waited for his acceptance, he began to laugh. Not his usual theatrical cackle, something quieter, more dangerous. The laugh of a predator who has just realized that his prey thinks itself the hunter. "Let me see if I understand," the Joker said, his voice silky with amusement. "You want me to help you destroy Batman, to serve as your, what was the phrase? Your agent of chaos, to dance to your tune while you pull the strings from your little clubhouse of billionaire sociopaths." The representatives shifted uncomfortably. This was not the reaction they had anticipated. "You don't understand the Bat and me," the Joker continued, rising from his seat, his movements fluid and predatory. "Nobody does. What we have is special, sacred even, and you think you can just buy your way into it, use me as a tool in your pathetic little game." He was circling them now, and the bodyguards they had brought were reaching for weapons they would never have time to draw. "Here's what's going to happen instead. I'm going to let your plan proceed, not because I'm working for you, never that, but because it amuses me. Because watching you pompous fools try to break the Bat will be entertaining, and when you fail, because you will fail, they always fail, I'll be there to pick up the pieces, to show you what real chaos looks like." The representatives did not leave that theatre alive. The Joker had his own plans for Batman, and they did not include sharing the stage with amateurs. The Black Glove's assault proceeded regardless. Dr. Hurt had anticipated the Joker's rejection, had built contingencies that did not require the clown's cooperation. He infiltrated Wayne Manor through corrupted servants. He administered drugs that triggered the psychological vulnerabilities he had mapped so carefully. He systematically stripped away Bruce Wayne's grip on reality, leaving only the fragmented backup personality struggling to maintain coherence. The Batman of Zur-En-Arrh emerged into a Gotham that had become a fever dream. Bruce Wayne's primary identity was suppressed, locked away behind walls of chemically induced amnesia. What remained was something rawer, more primal, a Batman without Bruce Wayne's restraint, without his strategic patience, without the humanity that had always tempered his war on crime. This Batman wore a patchwork costume assembled from garbage and rags, carried a baseball bat instead of batarangs, and fought with a ferocity that alarmed even those who had known him for years. And through it all, the Joker watched. He had reinvented himself for the occasion, another of his periodic transformations, this time into something he called the Thin White Duke of Death. Gone was the flamboyant purple suit, the garish makeup, the theatrical presentation that had characterized his previous incarnation. In its place was something sleeker, more dangerous, a Joker stripped down to essentials, all razor edges and cold calculation. He had carved his own face into a permanent smile, the Glasgow grin rendered in scar tissue rather than grease paint, a commitment to his aesthetic that transcended mere costume. The confrontation between this new Joker and the fractured Batman took place in Arkham Asylum, where Dr. Hurt had established his base of operations. The Black Glove's members had gathered to witness their triumph, to watch the final destruction of the hero they had wagered so much to destroy. They sat in the asylum's great hall like spectators at a gladiatorial arena, sipping champagne and waiting for the entertainment to begin. They did not understand what they had invited into their midst. The Joker moved through the Black Glove's security like a ghost, killing with an efficiency that demonstrated how much he had been holding back in his previous incarnations. He was not there to support Dr. Hurt's plan. He was there to hijack it, to demonstrate that whatever games these wealthy dilettantes thought they were playing, the real game had always been between him and the Batman. "You think you understand evil," he told the assembled plutocrats as their bodyguards fell around them. "You think you can quantify it, control it, bet on it like horses at a track. But you're tourists, dilettantes. You've never looked into the abyss and had it laugh back at you." He found Dr. Hurt in the asylum's deepest levels, preparing for his final confrontation with the broken Batman. The two villains faced each other across a space that stank of madness and old pain, each recognizing in the other a darkness that ordinary humans could not comprehend. "You're not part of the plan," Dr. Hurt said, his composure cracking for the first time. "I'm never part of the plan," the Joker replied. "I'm the thing that makes plans irrelevant." What followed was not an alliance, but a collision. Two forces of destruction that could not coexist, each determined to claim the prize of Batman's destruction for themselves. The Joker did not want to help the Black Glove succeed. He wanted to prove that their elaborate schemes were unnecessary, that he could accomplish in moments what they had spent years planning. He wanted to demonstrate, once and for all, that his relationship with the Batman transcended anything outsiders could understand or manipulate. Batman, the fragmented, feral Batman of Zur-En-Arrh, arrived in the midst of this chaos. His mind was shattered, his resources depleted, his very identity in question. But something in him remained unbroken. Something that Dr. Hurt's drugs could not reach, that the Black Glove's psychological warfare could not touch. The core of who he was, the promise made over his parents' graves, the commitment to justice that defined his existence, persisted even when everything else had been stripped away. The battle that followed was the stuff of legend. Batman fought through waves of enemies, through traps designed specifically to exploit his fractured psychology, through horrors that would have broken lesser men. He confronted Dr. Hurt and exposed the hollowness of his claims, the desperation beneath the aristocratic facade, and he faced the Joker in a confrontation that felt less like a fight and more like a conversation conducted in violence. "You can't win," the Joker told him as they grappled in the asylum's ruins. "Not really, not permanently. Every time you think you've beaten me, I come back. Every time you think you've saved your precious city, I burn it down again. This is what we are, Batman. This is what we do. Forever. Batman's response was not words, but action. He triggered the asylum's emergency systems, bringing the building down around them both. The helicopter carrying Dr. Hurt crashed into the Gotham River. The Black Gloves members scattered, their organization shattered, their wages lost. And the Joker disappeared into the chaos, laughing as always, already planning his next move. Bruce Wayne was declared dead in the aftermath. The Batman of Zur-En-Arrh had pushed his body beyond its limits, and the collapse of Arkham had seemingly claimed what remained. Gotham mourned. The criminal underworld celebrated. And the Joker experienced something he had not anticipated. Loss, not grief. He was incapable of grief in any human sense, but a profound sense of absence, a hollowness where his obsession had once resided. Without Batman, without the eternal dance they had shared, what was the point of anything? The Black Glove had tried to destroy the Dark Knight and had apparently succeeded, but their success was meaningless compared to what the Joker had lost. He retreated into something approaching depression, a flatness, a lack of enthusiasm that his henchwomen and surviving associates found more disturbing than his usual mania. He committed crimes, but mechanically, without his characteristic flair. He killed, but without joy. The game had ended, and he did not know how to exist without it. Of course, Batman was not dead. The Dark Knight had survived, had been transported through time by the Omega Sanction, had fought his way back through history itself to reclaim his place in the present. When he finally returned, when the news spread through Gotham that the Batman lived, the Joker's response was immediate and unmistakable. He laughed. Not the hollow laughter of his depressive period, real laughter, joyous laughter, the laughter of a man who had been granted a reprieve from meaninglessness, whose purpose had been restored, whose existence had been validated. The game continued, it always continued. And somewhere in the darkness of Gotham, two broken men circled each other once more, each grateful in their own twisted way that the other had survived. Consider the mathematics of their relationship. Decades of conflict, hundreds of encounters, thousands of opportunities for definitive resolution. The Joker has held Batman's life in his hands more times than either of them could count, has had the Dark Knight unconscious, restrained, vulnerable to a killing stroke that would end their war forever. Batman has stood over the Joker's broken body with every justification for lethal force, with the screaming ghosts of countless victims demanding that he finally, permanently remove this monster from existence. Neither has ever taken that final step. This is not accident. This is not coincidence. This is the fundamental truth of their relationship, the secret that neither will speak aloud, but both understand in the marrow of their bones. They need each other. Not in the romantic sense that the word implies, not even in the psychological sense of codependency, but in something more fundamental, existential. They are defined by their opposition, and without that opposition neither would know how to exist. The Joker articulated this truth during one of their countless confrontations, his words carrying the weight of genuine insight beneath their theatrical delivery. "You complete me," he told the Batman, and the statement was not mockery. It was confession. To understand why, one must first understand what each of them represents. Batman is order, control. The belief that chaos can be contained, that violence can be channeled toward justice, that human beings are capable of imposing meaning on a meaningless universe through sheer force of will. He is the argument that trauma does not have to destroy, that pain can be transformed into purpose, that the darkness inside every human heart can be directed toward the light. The Joker is the counter-argument. He represents chaos in its purest form, not the random chaos of natural disasters or the statistical chaos of quantum mechanics, but deliberate chaos, chosen chaos, chaos as philosophy and way of life. He is the belief that order is illusion, that meaning is self-deception, that the structures humans build to convince themselves their lives matter are sandcastles waiting to be washed away by the tide of entropy. He is the argument that trauma reveals rather than distorts, that pain strips away comfortable lies, that the darkness inside every human heart is the truest thing about us. These philosophies cannot coexist peacefully. They are mutually exclusive, fundamentally incompatible, locked in a debate that can never be resolved through words alone, and so the debate plays out through action, through crimes and captures, through escapes and pursuits, through the endless dance of violence that defines Gotham's nights. Batman needs the Joker because without the Joker, his crusade loses its justification. The Dark Knight fights crime, yes, but crime is mundane. Muggers and drug dealers, corrupt politicians and organised criminals, these are problems that could theoretically be solved, conditions that could be ameliorated through better social programs and more effective institutions. The Joker is different. The Joker is irreducible, unsolvable, a problem that will never go away no matter how many times he is captured and confined. He provides Batman with a purpose that can never be exhausted, an enemy worthy of eternal opposition. More than this, the Joker validates Batman's methods. Every time the Dark Knight defeats the Clown, every time he prevents another atrocity, every time he proves that order can triumph over chaos even temporarily, he demonstrates that his crusade is worthwhile. The Joker is the ultimate test of Batman's philosophy. If the Dark Knight can maintain his principles against this enemy, against someone who has taken everything from him, who has murdered his allies and tortured his friends and proven again and again that the rules Batman follows are arbitrary constraints, then those principles mean something. They are not merely convenient guidelines, but genuine moral commitments, tested in the harshest possible conditions. The Joker needs Batman for complementary reasons. Without an audience, chaos is merely noise. Without opposition, destruction is merely entropy. The Joker does not want to win, has never wanted to win, because winning would end the game that gives his existence meaning. He wants to play. He wants to perform. He wants to demonstrate his philosophy to someone capable of understanding it, even if that understanding manifests as rejection. Batman is the perfect audience. The only audience, really. No one else in Gotham, no one else in the world, possesses the intelligence, the determination, the sheer stubborn refusal to look away that makes the Joker's performances worthwhile. The Dark Knight sees everything the Joker does, understands everything the Joker means, and still rejects the conclusions. This rejection is not failure. It is the necessary component that makes the argument worth having. If Batman ever agreed with the Joker, ever acknowledged that chaos was the natural state and resistance was futile, the game would be over. The Joker would have won, and in winning, would have lost everything that mattered. This is why the Joker never kills Batman when he has the opportunity. The death of the Dark Knight would be a victory so complete that it would render all future victories meaningless. There would be no one left to oppose him, no one left to witness his performances, no one left to provide the resistance that transforms chaos into art. The Joker without Batman would be a comedian without an audience, a philosopher without students, a god without worshippers. He would be alone, truly alone. And even chaos cannot survive in a vacuum. The same logic applies in reverse. Batman's refusal to kill the Joker is often attributed to his moral code, the famous one rule that distinguishes him from the criminals he fights. But the code is not the whole explanation. Other criminals have violated the code less thoroughly and faced lethal force from heroes with fewer scruples. The Joker has earned death 1,000 times over by any reasonable moral calculus. Batman does not kill him because killing him would end the game. This is not a conscious calculation. Bruce Wayne would never admit, perhaps not even to himself, that some part of him needs the Joker to exist, but the pattern speaks for itself. Every time the Dark Knight has the opportunity for lethal resolution, something holds him back. The code, yes, but also something deeper, an instinct that recognizes the Joker as essential, as necessary, as the question that gives Batman's answer meaning. There is a darkness in this recognition that neither of them fully confronts. The Joker has suggested on multiple occasions that Batman is just as insane as he is, that the only difference between them is the direction their madness takes. The Dark Knight dresses as a bat and wages a one-man war against crime, driven by childhood trauma that a more balanced individual might have processed through therapy rather than vigilantism. He has sacrificed everything normal human beings value: relationships, comfort, peace of mind, in pursuit of a goal that can never be achieved. He is, by any conventional standard, obsessive to the point of pathology. Batman's response to this accusation has always been that the results matter, that his methods, however extreme, produce justice, that the suffering he prevents outweighs the suffering he inflicts. But the Joker's counter-argument is equally compelling. Results are temporary, methods are permanent, and the man who dresses as a bat to punch criminals has more in common with the man who dresses as a clown to kill them than either would care to admit. They are mirrors, dark reflections of each other, produced by similar traumas, expressing similar compulsions through opposite methodologies. Bruce Wayne lost his parents to random violence and responded by creating order. The Joker lost whatever he had, wife, child, sanity, identity, and responded by embracing chaos. Both of them transformed their pain into purpose. Both of them built identities designed to impose their worldviews on a city that had never asked for their intervention. The one bad day philosophy haunts this dynamic, the Joker's core belief that anyone can become him, that sanity is a thin veneer over madness, that the only difference between citizen and criminal is circumstance, is an argument aimed specifically at Batman. He wants to prove that the Dark Knight, despite all his discipline and training and moral certainty, is one tragedy away from becoming exactly what he fights against. The attempts to corrupt Batman have been numerous and devastating. The murder of Jason Todd, the paralysis of Barbara Gordon, the torture of Commissioner Gordon, each atrocity designed to push the Dark Knight past his limits, to force him into the lethal action that would prove the Joker right. And each time, Batman has held the line, has absorbed the pain without surrendering his principles, has proven through sheer force of will that the one bad day hypothesis has exceptions. But the attempts continue, will always continue, because the Joker cannot accept that his philosophy is wrong, and the only way to prove it right is to break the one person who seems immune to it. Alternative universes have explored what happens when the line is finally crossed. Stories where Batman kills the Joker, where the provocation finally exceeds the restraint, where decades of accumulated grief explode into a moment of lethal violence. These stories share a common theme. The killing does not bring peace. It brings transformation. Batman becoming something darker, something closer to what the Joker always claimed he was, something that proves the clown's philosophy correct even as it ends his life. The tragedy of their relationship is that neither resolution is acceptable. Batman cannot kill the Joker without proving the Joker right. The Joker cannot kill Batman without destroying the only thing that gives his existence meaning. And so they continue, locked in eternal opposition, each unable to end the other, each unable to exist without the other. Order and chaos, tragedy and comedy, the knight and the fool dancing in the darkness of Gotham City. This dynamic has captivated readers for over 80 years because it touches something fundamental about the human condition. We all contain both impulses, the desire for order and the recognition that order is fragile, the need for meaning and the suspicion that meaning is constructed. Batman and the Joker externalize this internal conflict, giving form to the philosophical debate that every conscious being conducts within themselves. They are not merely characters, they are archetypes, symbols that will endure as long as humans struggle with the questions they represent. And so, the dance continues. It will always continue. As long as there is a Gotham, there will be a Batman standing against the darkness. And as long as there is a Batman, there will be a Joker laughing in the shadows, asking the question that can never be fully answered. Why so serious? The laughter echoes through Arkham's halls tonight, as it has echoed for decades, as it will echo for decades more. The cell contains a man who is not merely a man, who is an idea, a philosophy, a force that cannot be imprisoned no matter how thick the walls. And somewhere in the city above, a shadow moves across the rooftops, drawn by a signal that burns against the clouds. They will meet again. They always meet again. And in that meeting, the eternal question will be posed once more. Can order triumph over chaos? Can meaning survive the void? Can one man hold the line against the laughter of the abyss? The answer, for tonight at least, is yes. Tomorrow, the question will be asked again.